It has been bought, by all accounts, from what I've heard, by a big Tolkien enthusiast. Because that's its sort of connection, and they're going to, I think, really play that up. Because, I mean, I grew up in Oxford. I went to school in Oxford, went to university in Oxford, and, the Bird and Baby and the Lamb and Flag across the road were just classic Oxford pubs, but they had that sort of history. And I think they're looking to sort of leverage oh my God, Tolkien sat here when he wrote The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that's good, because I think I've been in there a couple of times before, and when I did, it wasn't great in there. Like, it needed a bit of a refresh. But if you've got a Tolkien fan with enough money, then you got to hope they're going to do something good with it.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it doesn't turn into a sort of, okay, everyone has to go in there. It's a Singapore gin slaying. You go there and have a drink kind of thing, and it's just filled with a transient crowd. I mean, it was
people dressed up as wizards.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a good Oxford pub.
Yeah,
the King's Arms.
C.S. Lewis used to go in there as well, I think, didn't he? Yeah.
But I mean, again, it's a good Oxford pub. Lots of really famous people went to Oxford, so they're going to go drink it. You got the Turf and you got the Bear and things like that. I mean, the Bear's been around since 1512 or something.
Yeah. Is there any quotes like with Tolkien? Did he ever knowingly mention it?
No, not that I'm aware of, but I haven't chased it down. There is a small little plaque somewhere, sort of like Tolkien sat here once. I mean, it's interesting. Oxford is, I mean, I was born there, or not born there. I was born in Newcastle, but I've always I consider that my home because we always had a family home there. And it's always slightly punched below its weight in terms of hospitality side of things, because it's lots of students and stuff. It's always been a fun place. But having been in Bath recently, where, the Dark Horse, 70% of our trade was tourists, people come down to Bath for the weekend. I'm not sure whether it's because you don't go to Oxford for the weekend. You can day trip it from London, thank you very much. You've got Bicester Village nearby, which is a far bigger tourist draw. But I always thought there's a bunch of good bartenders who've come out of Oxford. Alex Turner, myself, my younger brother, Rob Poulter.
My ex-boss, Polly Dent.
Of course, Polly, who I worked with down in Brighton. But she asked her about the Duke of Cambridge, and she'd be like, oh yeah, that was the place. All Brown's waitresses went there after work and had a good sort of sexy feel. And I was really keen, because the guy's owned it for 25 years, but has driven it to the ground. Happy hours, £6.50 student cocktails, whereas it was the place that my first girlfriend's parents used to go drinking on a Saturday night. And there is no place in Oxford where, if you are a little bit older and don't want to deal with fucking happy hours or vertical drinking, it was the place you went. But he wants 300 grand for the place. And it's just like, it's like your business is not justifying that.
You have a lot of goodwill going on for that kind of figure, haven't you?
Considering that he already liquidated the company before with debts of £1.3 million, all to the tax man and VAT man and things like that. I mean, he is hooky, but he's like, 20 years ago we were making 250 grand a year. I'm like, that's good, but it was 20 years ago. Now you're open 4 days a week. The staff don't know what the fuck they're doing. The cocktails are ropey as hell. And yes, the site is worth this, but you owe 150 grand to the landlord. So, he was
Dream world.
Yeah.
Some people just, I think, pluck a figure out of the air because that's what it feels like they need to retire the business. And it's like, yeah, but where are you getting that number from other than just your sort of little dream world you're living in,
I mean, I asked him I said, look, my potential investors came in on a Saturday night. There's 8 people here. Someone's being taught how to pour a pint. Someone else is being taught how to make a margarita. 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. They're not going to drop 300 grand in this because, yes, they can do it via, EIS and the other things like that. So they get tax breaks on it, but they're looking at it and saying, it's going to take years to make our money back off this. And so he sent me some P&Ls, but it was like, you spent £159 on energy last year? Like, I can't send these to my investors because they're going to laugh even harder. This makes no sense at all.
I always think with premiums, unless it's a location that is like kind of intrinsic to whatever you're offering, and as is, and I guess you could say any location is intrinsic to your offering, but there are, certain cases where you genuinely need to be on a high street or in a certain area, then it's sort of a waste of money because assuming you're planning on opening something of a high standard, that will be the draw for people to come in because you're going to be operating at that level and you don't need the goodwill that exists in that business already because it's not going to be your business.
Absolutely. My investors were like, it's small windows, you can't look in as you go past type thing. And I'm like, yeah, that's the vibe for I'm an older crowd. Yeah. I mean, the point is in the early days when I used to go there occasionally, like the door was shut. You had to knock on the door to get in. And, you could look in the windows and stuff like that, but everywhere else there's great big wide doors, come in. The doorman stood inside, you knocked on the door and he was like, no, sorry, we're full, if you didn't look right. So when I explained to them, you don't need big windows, you don't need that sense of footfall. It works, and we can make shitloads of money here, but it's negotiating him down from 300 grand to, I suggested what I called a WeBo approach, a work-in, buy-out. I said, look, I will come in, I'll bring 50 grand in to do some refurbishments, which you need. You fuck the decor badly, etc. You fuck this, you fuck that. I'll come in and do that. And after a year, we'll reevaluate it, because hopefully by this stage, you've got a year's worth of good figures, which could make it more valuable. I'll say, let's have a guaranteed price that I can buy it out after that year, or I get a percentage of what you sell it if I. But again, he was like, no, I don't want any, I want 300 grand. And I was like, okay, well, that's not going to happen. He's like, cool. I was like, fine. So it was annoying. Oxford needs a good, grown up, proper cocktail bar.
What's Raoul's like? By the way, have we started? You okay with it?
Yeah, absolutely.
We can just roll into it.
No, it's fine. We're all good.
We'll continue then. What's Raoul's like these days? Because that's a long-standing institution.
Raoul's was 79. Duke was 81. The Duke was where your parents went to drink. Raoul's was the cocktail bar that you went if you were younger and cooler and hipper.
That's got to be one of the oldest cocktail bars in the country, right?
Possibly, yeah. Weirdly, there was the guy who ran it, or the head bartender there was a guy called Stanford. He was a raging alcoholic, but he used to run classes. I interviewed him once for a student magazine when I was there, so it would have been, 91 or something. And he used to run classes about the history of cocktails and stuff. And I was like, fine. And it was a really cool bar, really tight, busy, a lot of whole really good bartenders worked there. Then after a bit, it got bought and basically turned into the Match Bar. It looked like that, etc. And I think it's been doing fine. It closed during COVID and then took ages to reopen, like 3 years before it reopened. And again, the Dark Horse people were looking at it and saying this would be a great property, but they were like, no, we don't want to sell it, we don't want to sell it, we don't want to sell it.
And how many iterations of ownership has it gone through in that time?
Well, I've known theoretically 3, but I saw the other day, they say that, I think Tim Fitzgibbon, who works there, said, I'm leaving, it's my last day type thing because it's been sold to new owners.
Right.
So I'm like, okay. But that end of town, where I live in East Oxford, having a terrible time with low traffic neighborhoods and stuff, and it's just killed a whole bunch of businesses there because it's so difficult to drive, so difficult to park. But that end of Oxford is slightly posher, and it's easier to park, and you could drive, and also, of course, people, it's close to the theatres and stuff like that. Yeah. So that area, I think, is still Jericho, which is where the Raoul's is, I think, is growing, whereas Cowley used to be the cool, funky, studenty area.
Well, I remember Cowley, because I was at uni in Oxford for a full 9 months, and about 8.5 of those months were spent on Cowley Road.
Yeah, I lived there 3 times as a student. My mum now lives just off it, etc. And it's, it's an interesting place, but...
Is that still where the students go out? Is it still like kind of sort of small nightclub type things? And
sort of. You've got the O2 down there, which is your sort of live music venue. It was the Zodiac back in the day.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So that's that. Every other shop is now a coffee shop or a hairdressing salon. That seems to be, I'm not sure if it's a money laundering thing or whether it's immigrants.
Lots of hair.
Well, there was always the idea that I think it was, somebody once said, if you're an immigrant in a new country, there are 2 things, hairdressing and tailoring. But basically, you don't need any real resources. Pair of scissors in the chair, set up a bar, salon,
both of them need a pair of scissors, actually. Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. It's interesting how things change in terms of, we get sent stuff. Now Brookes University, what was Oxford Poly, they send out sort of messages and saying, these are the people you complain to if students are being loud, but be aware that Wednesday is now the night that they go out. So Wednesdays are much busier than they used to be. I used to run student nightclubs and, on Mondays and Tuesdays. There was, you had riots on a Tuesday, you had Mud Club on a Wednesday, and you had Excuses, the first one I ran on Monday. And they were always packed because poly students, I went to university in Oxford. That was the thing, maybe Brookes Uni. Plus also things like land management. So you had a lot of, Hooray Henrys and stuff.
Yeah, no, by the way, that was me, by the way. I wasn't at Oxford University.
Right.
And I wasn't a Hooray Henry, but I was amongst them.
Yeah, because there were an awful lot. You get the people coming over from Cirencester Agricultural College to hang out with their friends that they went to school with, etc. But it's interesting to see how Oxford's changed from that point of view. Obviously the demographics of the university now are significantly different from what they were. And I think you have less rich people with money, kids, etc. And so it's not quite as vibrant a social scene as it used to be like that.
Since I left, really, 20 years ago.
Yeah. But again, I mean, people like Piers Adam came through there. He used to run riots, and it became a thing that you would buy into a nightclub and spend your 2 years there promoting it, making money each week. And I was making 200 quid a week as a student. It was like, right, okay.
Yeah, well, but it's the same kind of temptation drew me in as well. I was like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
I don't need to stay a higher education. I can actually work in a bar. I get to it's kind of like socializing, and I get paid for it. I worked at the Bridge nightclub for, I think I got fired, and then they gave me my job back. But I was doing the cloakroom and sort of bussing basically, and bar backing, that kind of stuff, filling up ice wells. It was kind of my first bar job. I had a bar job in Cornwall briefly before the age of 18, where I was occasionally serving pints. It was a very small village pub, so you could get away with it, but it was mostly kind of like stocking fridges and cleaning and that kind of thing. But that was my first job really in Oxford. And then when I inevitably dropped out of university, I then got into hospitality properly when I got home. So you mentioned you worked at the clubs. Did you work in bars before that, or was that?
No, I didn't want to be a bartender. I wanted to be a professional cricketer. So that was my thing. I was a fast bowler, really good. Thank you very much. England schoolboy, or at least England public schoolboy. And in those days, perhaps an easy route to it was going to Oxford or Cambridge, because they were considered first-class counties, so you played against them. So that was fine. But having been to school in Oxford and then going back to university there, I wanted a bit of time off. So I took a gap year, and I was working in Marks and Spencer's during Christmas, working in men's gifts, I think I was. But a friend of mine said, well, if you want to earn money, you should work in nighttime as well. And I'm like, oh, what the fuck could I do at nighttime? He said, well, I'm working in the Coven nightclub as a bartender. Come down and work with me. I was like, I've never worked as a bartender before. It's so easy. Still remember the first drink I ever made, which was a gin and orange.
Delicious.
Gin, orange squash.
Orange squash?
Well, there was like gin and orange. I'm like, okay, gin, orange squash.
Oh, this is your recipe.
No ice, no water. I mean, they were training in those days. I worked with a guy called Phil, who was gay, because the Coven used to be a gay club. It had then changed to being a straight club, but all their staff was still gay. And a guy called Royella, who sort of talked like this. And I was like, wow, okay, this is really weird. But I actually still know the sister of the girl who I served that day, that first drink. But it was gin, orange squash, no water, no ice.
There at the inception point, yeah.
And then, I worked there had a lot of fun working there, and learned all about different, should we say, positions. Position one near the nightclub, near the dance floor, was the busiest. All you did was serve people. Again, you had to be really good at maths, because you were just putting prices in via your own head. Station 4, as such, was where the glass washer was and where you changed kegs So I became a glass collecting ninja. It was just one of those things. I was a sportsman. I just saw this as a sporting activity.
Yeah,
two hands, not one.
Gamified it.
Yeah. So that was all fine. Went away, travelled, came back to Oxford. That was all good. And I sort of thought I quite enjoyed this, and I also wanted to do a bit of work while I was there. So I went to a guy called Phil Cotton, who was a cool little bartender who worked actually at the Duke of Cambridge. I was like, I want to be a bartender. I'd like to work in the Duke of Cambridge. He said, Duke of Cambridge is full at the moment, but there's this new place, this Mexican restaurant that's just opened up. You should go and see them. And I was like, okay. And I remember walking there. It was in a basement. It was called La Cantina Palenque. And I walked down the stairs and turned the corner, and the bar was tiny in a basement. It was a restaurant as well, but I turned the corner to see the bar, and there were two guys, I ended up working with them, Dan and Zeb. Bandanas, T-shirts, like packets of Marlboro rolled up in the sleeves of their things, etc. Dancing backwards and forwards, because the bar was really narrow, shaking three-piece cocktail shakers like that, while crazy Zydeco music was playing. And the place was filled with girls. And, not to be offensive, but there wasn't a dry seat in the house. Like, these guys were fucking rock stars. And I thought, yeah, I could do this.
What year was this?
It would have been 89.
So it sort of coincides roughly with the movie Cocktail, I think.
Yeah,
right?
it was there. I can't remember necessarily seeing it. I remember Buffy the Vampire Slayer was the film.
Oh, yeah.
Was the cool thing that we were doing. But the general manager there had come from, it was a guy called Simon Young, raging alcoholic, as I learned over time. But he had come from London, and he'd come from the Coconut Grove Peppermint Park thing. And you can almost, like the Roux brothers, trace everyone back in London bartending to either Coconut Grove Peppermint Park or Fred Zanzibar.
So describe what they are?
They were sort of cool nightclub bars, etc. And it's like, Dick came from Zanzibar and Fred's and stuff like that, and a lot of other people came via the other side. And they had the head chef there was an ex-Cafe Pacifico guy. And the point is, this wasn't an Oxford place. This was a bunch of London people who'd come to Oxford. And it was a different attitude. And it was a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, they had an old dentist chair there, and we would, you would buy someone the dentist chair and drop them back and cover their lips in salt and give them a lime to squeeze, all this sort of stuff, and then pour a bottle of tequila, Orandain Olitas, if I remember rightly.
Nice.
And a bottle of lime and Cointreau into your mouth whilst counting, one monkey, two monkey, all their friends cheering and things like that. I mean, it was just so much fun.
Sounds like a proper drinking experience.
When the weird thing is, when we had 14 tequilas in 1989.
Wow, that was like all of them.
Yeah, I mean, Sauza Tre Generazione with a really sexy bottle and things like that. And we had a lot of fun, but also there's a bottle of Suze on the back bar. I don't think we ever sold any of it at all. Old Grandad was there were a whole bunch of really amazing brands. Maker's Mark, when they only brought in 1,000 bottles of Maker's Mark into the UK a year. So if you had Maker's Mark, it really meant something. And that's what they sort of taught me, that alcohol isn't just something that makes your legs go funny and make members of the opposite sex look more attractive. This is someone's life's work. And like, they're not here to stand in front of the guest and say how good it is, but you're that sort of gatekeeper. So things like Makers were just like, no, somebody ordered Maker's Mark. But those were the days where if there was a bottle of Moskovskaya on the back bar, I mean, somebody knew what their shit. You looked on back bars, but a whole bunch of weird stuff. Punti Mess.
Yeah.
Simon was a huge Punti Mess fan, so any bar he ever worked at, you would always find a case of Punti Mess in the storeroom.
I remember one of my first earlier bar jobs, which was in a restaurant bar, and probably the job where I was like, okay, I think I want to do this. It was a restaurant in Polzeth, and it was the discovery that all of these brands had a story and a distinction between them, and that if you delve deep enough, you find out these fascinating things about their origins, the people that make them, the cultures or the countries, and then obviously within that or above that is spirit categories themselves. And that was the thing that really attracted me. I was like, oh wow, there's actually something really interesting lurking around underneath all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I talk to people all the time, why did you get into the industry? And people nowadays are like, I love serving people, I love working with flavors, I love creativity. And anyone, should we say my age, it was like sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And the thing was, and again, the reason why I was lucky is that it was, a small bar in a restaurant, busy Mexican restaurant, but they shared the tips equally. So I was making 30 quid a night in tips, which as a bartender you never did, but servers did, but they shared it. So it really taught me, about how to be respectful to your servers, because they were the ones making the money, thank you very much. But, the idea in those days, it's really so difficult to explain to people how primitive it was. And I said yesterday, when I started, there were 3 bartending books: Mr. Boston, the Regan's Bartender's Bible, and Schumann's The American Bar. You had no internet. You had no experienced bartenders to say, hey, how do you make this? And we were sort of making it up as we went along, kind of thing. But it was a lot of fun. And I realized that one day I was working behind the bar and someone came in who I was at university with. I mean, I was doing this whilst at university. I studied geography. I went there to do cricket more than anything else. I loved my geography, but it turned out the bits of geography I liked, they weren't teaching there. I liked what's called perception geography, which I'd learned as I was studying for the Oxford entrance exam. So I stopped going to lectures after the second week of the first term of the first year.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. I am legendary. I'm the first person since 1946, and this was in 1992, first person in 46 years to fail geography at Oxford University. Because if you fail, then you can retake it. If you get a third or a pass, you can't. And I've been playing cricket. I played one first-class cricket game, etc. But I was running nightclubs. I was organising raves. I was having quite the time. Because I figured the only degrees worth getting from Oxford are a first or a fail. If you get in, you're obviously clever. A first means you are academically brilliant. A fail means that, okay, you got in, but you must have been doing some hellishly cool stuff while you were there.
Yeah. Obviously something else was distracting you.
Yeah. But I remember someone I was studying geography from another college, came in and didn't look at me behind the bar and just said, I'll get a gin and tonic. I said, fine. I'll get a margarita. Fine. And I was just like, I can actually remember more than one drink at a time. And they looked up slightly shocked and they're like, fuck, Angus. And it made me realize, and it's always been a life lesson, that hospitality is really easy to do badly. It's really difficult to do well. And that competitive bit that was in me from sport meant I wanted to do better. And if better was learning about why Maker's Mark was so special or learning about the different types of tequila, And so I obviously, Oxford taught me about that sense of alcohol not just being, a sedative and a social lubricant, etc. I then moved down to London and then Brighton, where it was really about cranking out drinks at top speed. I cut my hair short because I used to have long hair. I used to wear steel toe-cap Doc Martens shoes with silverthane insoles with climbing socks to look after my feet and things like that. That taught me about being really fast. Then I moved to New York, where nobody gave a shit who I'd worked with in the UK. All they cared about is, if I give you a job, who will come to the bar because I've given you this job on a Tuesday night? But secondly,
who would you attract into the venue?
It was literally, do you have a crowd?
Right.
I mean, Dale DeGraff talks about one of the biggest...
like gig culture.
Well, Dale talks about one of the biggest changes in American bartending is that you now have bar teams, whereas you didn't used to. You'd have bar backs who worked all the time, but you'd have someone who'd do Monday and Wednesday, somebody else who'd do Tuesday and Thursday, somebody who'd do Saturday, because like a DJ, they bought a crowd.
Yeah, or a club promoter.
Yeah, and partially it was because in those days, moving to New York, the idea of the buyback. I remember sitting in Odeon. It was like the first restaurant bar I went to while I was looking for a job in New York. And I'm sitting there talking to Dylan, the bartender, and that's great. And I'm drinking Dos Equis, which again shows you how long ago it was. And when I ordered my third one, he goes, that one's on me. And I thought, fuck, he's hitting on me. But then I talked to people and they said, no, it's what's called a buyback policy. Generally, it tended to be every third drink or every fourth drink, the bar would buy you that drink to either make you stay longer or you'd leave a big tip for the staff. And when I was hiring people, when I was running a bar, people would say, what is your buyback policy? And customers would say, what's your buyback policy? Because I go to the bar across the road, if they're going to buy me 1 in 3 and you do 1 in 4.
Where's your T's and C's?
Yeah, pretty much. But over there, everyone would introduce themselves to you, because next time they walk into the door, they want you to be, hey, Tristan, how are you doing? Because you moved to New York, you want that sense of camaraderie. So it was really about, Cantina was all about the product. Brighton was all about doing it at top speed perfectly. And New York was making the person who's drinking it feel good. And that, I think, is a sort of trifecta of hospitality. And the other thing that happened in New York is the guy I was working for was a rather interesting character. Brit, knew the places in England that I'd worked at. But more importantly, he was in new media, as it was called, like CD-ROMs. And he introduced me to the internet.
Right.
And I've discovered a website called, it was hotwire.com/cocktails. Paul Harrington is the guy who was doing it. And they were articles each week that were about like the Pegu Club or the Monkey Gland or the Aviation or the Manhattan. And it was interestingly written, but at the same time I was like, wait there, this drink was invented at a time, at a place, by someone for an event. It's not just a recipe. Like,
there's an origin story to them. Yeah.
There is, and it became a sort of, I publicized the saying that my mission is to know as much as I possibly can about drinks, drinkers, and those that serve them. And again, that's that sense of trifecta that, I love alcohol, the effect of it, less and less increasingly now, but the idea of it being rooted in society, in a time, in a place, and important cultural traditions, and as I say, drinks to celebrate, or, the black velvet, all that sort of stuff. And also then that sense of, learning about the people, making people feel good about being there, and finally that sense of professional bartending. And a lot of my work in the early days was what makes a good bartender, because what the fuck do we know? Knowledge and efficiency and style and service, because we were making it up in those days, and in the early days of Class magazine and the early days of all those sort of bartender magazines and the start of the Renaissance for the bartender. We were starting from basically zero and just trying to build up.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard to imagine without the availability of the cocktail books. And of course, there are old cocktail books, but I guess your kind of eyes were shielded from those. They just weren't known to you at the time, because where do you go to know about them, right?
Yeah.
And then without the internet itself, and I guess you just got your own community of bartenders. It's like, well, I've tried this, I've learned that, I've heard of this drink, that guy's doing it this way. But it's a bit Chinese whispers, isn't it? It's
nobody really restricted on product. I mean, if you had 3 bottles of gin in your bar, you were a gin specialist bar. When I'm doing gin training, I say it'd be a lot easier 25 years ago because I would have had less wrinkles, but also there were only about 8 brands of gin you needed to know about.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I started, it was you wouldn't find more than 3 bottles of gin behind a bar.
I started bartending pre-Bombay Sapphire. I mean, in New York, Bombay Dry was when somebody ordered Bombay. That's what they meant. And so it was, it's interesting from that point of view to see how it's developed. And it is still that sense of, drinkers and those that serve them. And I think we keep getting out of balance, and we'll sort of talk about that later, how I think our industry has been somewhat co-opted by the drinks industry. And I see people using the same term interchangeably. I'm like, no, I'm in the hospitality industry. I serve drinks, but I also have furniture and lighting and music. I'm not in the music industry.
Yeah, I get it. That's a good distinction. You mentioned about the transition from going from the UK to America. It always feels like there's a different culture of hospitality between those two. How would you define them both, and how, if at all, do you think they've changed over the last 25 years?
It's interesting. I mean, first off, I think that sense of human interaction. When I worked in New York in '93, nowhere had a cocktail list. Like, you didn't tell New Yorkers what to drink. New Yorkers knew what to drink. Thank you very much. And so there was a lot more fashion stuff going on, a lot of Stoli Orange martinis because they'd seen it on a billboard outside. America's always been perceived as better for service. It's just more attentive, annoyingly so sometimes. I'm taking a sip of water, let me refill your water glass up. But it's tip-based. So
the sort of recital of the introduction of who I am and what I'm going to do tonight, I find a little bit grating because it's often so robotic that it's disingenuous.
Yeah, I remember.
But it can be done well, of course.
No, I took a group of bartenders once to Hong Kong for the Hong Kong Bar Show, and we went to eat in Morton's Steakhouse over there. And our server came out. There were 8 of us. Our server came out and gave us the spiel, cuts of meat, all of this sort of stuff. And I was with Mark Ridgewell, Ben Reed, Alex Turn, Alex Cameling. And at the end of this little 10-minute spiel she gave us, we applauded. Or we said, we know how difficult it is to do that in a way that doesn't. But it was all about compensation in those days. That in England, you worked for what you got paid per hour.
Yeah.
Whereas in America, you were earning tips. So you had to connect, you had to interact, you had to be overt in terms of the level of service and attentiveness you were being given.
So the tip cultures, in a way, defined the style of hospitality.
For sure. Yeah. But I mean, I was making more, I'm sure I was making more in 1993 than bartenders are making nowadays. I mean, if I made $400 a night in cash tips, that was a bad night. I mean, I would walk out of there occasionally with $700-800 in cash.
That's insane.
And it was just like, right, no. I've ended up managing the place because they didn't know what they were doing. And it got to the stage, weirdly, I wasn't allowed to employ men. It was just like, no, you can only employ women because they're less threatening and everyone loves flirting with them, etc. And if the guys are coming in, the women will come in, which was always really weird. The idea of, okay, we talk now about gender in bars and things like that. I mean, for a long time, it was difficult to get a job as a man in a bar in New York, especially the cooler bars, because, but now obviously, trends happen, they continue to move around, and the UK's got an awful lot better. I mean, tipping culture is still not nearly as prevalent. I mean, in New York, it used to be you double the sales tax. So 8.5%, 17% tip. It's easy to work it out. Now, 20% tip is minimum.
Yeah.
But I remember somebody saying, a server coming up and saying, that table stiffed me. I was like, yeah, get used to it, honey. She goes, no, you don't understand. That was a $100 bottle of champagne. The government thinks I'm going to get a 10% tip off there. We have to declare our sales, so the government will tax me on $10. If I don't get any money, that's costing me $2 to serve that table. And I was like, right, okay, I didn't realize that that's how it worked from a taxation point of view, etc.
Yeah. But what do you think about tipping culture? It'd be very difficult to just have a magic bullet that overnight switches it off and gets all venues to pay their staff more. But do you think ultimately that is the better way of doing things? Everyone gets paid a fair amount and no one tips.
No. I mean, I would like to say yes in an ideal world, but you look at people in America, New York, Danny Meyer, for example, who do this. Okay. And the problem is that you lose the really good people.
Yeah.
Because they're like, no, I earn my 20%, thank you very much. And I earn more than that because I provide excellent service. But now there's no incentive to do that because we all get paid the same amount of money. So it's good for the kitchen. It's good you can spread the amount of wealth to people who aren't necessarily forward-facing. But we talk about a bar being the ultimate small business because theoretically, somebody else is paying your rent, somebody else is buying your stock. You make a 10%, 20% commission for selling. Having said that, I hate upselling. Every place I work at, I'm like, I never want to hear the term upselling. Selling, definitely. But build trust, build rapport, earn trust. But every time I order something, they're like, hey, would you like to try this? I'm like, let me guess, it's more expensive. Yeah, it is. You're like, right, yeah, that's gouging me. So no, I don't want that. But I don't have a problem. I like performance. I'm a sportsman, so I like performance-based systems.
Performance-related bonus, in a sense, isn't it? Yeah.
But you do have to moderate it and say, gouging your guests, extracting the most amount of money out of them every time they come through the door is not good for the business long term. Make $10 of them each visit, but have them come back twice a week until you die or they die. That's the way you make money in the hospitality industry. But there are still, Las Vegas, Washington, D.C. is perhaps the best paid bar job in the entire world. Why? Because it doesn't matter how well or badly the economy is doing, there's always politicians and there's always lobbyists. So DC bartenders work 4 nights a week and earn $120,000 a year. You're like, fuck, okay. Yeah, how do I get a job here?
Yeah.
But it wasn't about skill. And
earning more than some of the politicians.
Pretty much. As I say, lobbyists are the key. They got the money floating around, bribing politicians and wining and dining them and things like that.
So that's your early bar career. And then you jumped out of it for a while, or at least jumped out of being a professional bartender. So maybe let's go through that part of the story next.
I'd been working in New York, and I came back in, 95, 96, and got a job working as a young, hip sales rep for Allied Domecq. Douglas Ankerer put me in touch. He said, look, Allied Domecq, this guy, Peter Ayling's putting together a team to start liaising with the style bar market, which is what it was called in those days. So I did that for a bit. Allied Domecq is now defunct, but it had terrible brands. Weirdly, it had Maker's Mark, which was interesting, and I met Mark Ridgewell through that, the only person in those days employed by Maker's Mark outside the US. The Teachers, Lefroy, Ballantyne's, Beefeater, which they did nothing with in the UK. My entire activation for Beefeater every year was going down to the boat race course to make sure that none of the pubs there had Gordon's banners. So they did nothing with it. It was a big brand in Spain, nothing in the UK.
That's hilarious.
Plymouth, which was their supermarket gin. It was the round bottle, 37.5% ABV. We never did anything with it.
Yeah.
Tia Maria, Sauza Tequila.
God bless that brand bottle.
Yeah.
Fond memories of that.
So I did that. Then they had a reorganization of the company. There was myself and a guy called Ross McKenzie, who now is a big bar owner up in Manchester. They never employed a third person. There was supposed to be a third person. But then they had a reorganization of the sales team, and they had to offer redundancy to everybody. And they were like, wait there, so I've not really been enjoying this job, and now you're going to pay me $7,000 to stop doing it? Hell yeah, I'll take that. Set up a consultancy business, doing a few bits of training. We got a call from someone saying, I work for Diageo, I work for Tanqueray Gin, Johnnie Walker, and we probably don't remember this. Johnnie Walker, they now have these Johnnie Walker houses and things like that. But in, I think it was 98 or whatever, they were opening bars in Asia. So there was a massive Johnnie Walker bar in Bangkok, for example. And they said, we want to open a Johnnie Walker bar in New York. And you worked in New York, I understand. So could we have a meeting? So
I think I've been to one in Seoul.
Well, the problem was, I went to have a meeting with them and I said, look, the problem is you can't open a bar in New York. Brands can't do shit like that. And they're like, oh, okay, that's a bit bad. Then, of course, the Asian market tanked and it ruined all of them. There was a massive, all the tiger economies in Asia suddenly had a massive financial meltdown. And so they closed those. But the guy who interviewed me said, oh, by the way, we're opening a new head office and there's going to be a bar in it. And our problem is that it's going to be run by Sodexo, or it's going to be run by Eurest, which is part of Compass Group. And they're just going to treat it like the staff canteen. But, this is the world's biggest drinks company, and we need someone running the bar who knows what they're doing. So I got contacted. They said, basically, we want to hire you, or we want you to be the bar manager, but whoever ends up running the bar, you'll work for them. So I ended up working for Eurest, running Smiles on One, was part of a corporate name. Diageo in those days, where we make people smile, all around the world every day, that sort of thing.
Sounds like a childcare.
It was horrible. The gym up above was Tone On 2, which is like,
right, okay.
But, it was an awesome thing because it was on Wimpole Street, so centre of London. Cost price. If you had a round there of over £10, you were doing well. Johnnie Walker Blue was £2.70 a shot. Back bar was all of the rare malts, all of the Flora and Fauna series.
I remember Henrietta Place, the old Diageo office.
Yeah,
it was pretty cheap in there.
They were across the road, and but it started off as being the bar for UDV was in there.
Yeah,
it was fun. We had challenges. The Guinness crew would come in and be a lot of basically pack off, don't tell us to leave. We know people who can kneecap you,
smashing Blue Label and threatening you.
Absolutely, because the people who worked in the office would invite their friends over. Thursday and Friday, we had queues outside the door.
Yeah,
everyone had to sign into the office. So that was all good. But one day, again, this guy, Neil Woodcock, who'd been Johnnie Walker, was now Tanqueray, came down and said, we're having a global duty-free conference. We've got people coming in from around the world, but we'd like to do a breakout session. And we'd like to teach them how to make the perfect Tanqueray martini. Could we bring them down to the bar and do that? And I said, yep, not a problem at all. They came down to the bar. I ran them through the 4 questions you should ask if you order a martini. And then afterwards I said, wow, that was really good. Could you do that for, like, bartenders? I was like, yeah, of course.
Did you do that for a job?
They also said, we do a lot of events, and we sponsor the event, and at the end we give them 20 cases of Tanqueray, and it's, Julie McDonald fashion show, and it's so badly run. So could you start helping us with that as well? So I was still being the bar manager of Smiles on One, but I now set up a separate company, the International Playboy Bartenders, and we did the brand training, internally, but also externally, and also events. And we ended up doing most of the sort of big events, film premieres, fashion shows. I mean, I'm not sure whether I employed you, but I employed a whole bunch of people of your ilk, etc. We were charging £50 an hour for a bartender. We're paying £35 an hour for the bartender. So people made good money. And we did all these really cool events. And I started developing training programs and running training programs, and the consultancy side of things stopped doing the bar and just doing events and training and things like that. So we hired Ben Reed and we hired Alex Turner, and we were one of the first bartender agencies, call them what they will, bar consultants. This is pre-brand ambassadors. You had Robbie Barg and the Gorgeous Group, and you had us, and you had Behind Bars, and you had a couple of other people, whatever Jasper and Carberry were doing in those days. But it was good times, thank you very much. But I realized Asia was where the real money was. So I looked to set up an international Playboy Bartenders Asia, because the Chinese market was growing at such a massive rate, etc. But then when I moved over there to try and help set it up and talking about, okay, well, you guys can come across as well. And they were like, we don't want to go to Asia. I said, okay, we'll set up a different company, but the ownership's different. And they're like, no, we don't want different ownership. You do all the hard work. We'll take the money for this. And actually, we don't like what you do anyway, because you make us feel a bit small. And so we've decided we'd like to buy you out or kick you out, because the shares aren't worth anything at all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that was into consultancy, but then it started my sort of, I won't say love affair with Asia. I was having a lot of fun over there. And, it was an interesting growing market in Hong Kong, but doing a lot of traveling, etc. And then I got a call one day from Andy Gaunt, you may know from Diageo, saying, hey, we want to recruit a global brand ambassador for Tanqueray No. 10. Could you help make recommendations? And I thought about it for about 20 minutes and then emailed him back and said, yeah, me. He said, what? I said, yeah, me. I used to work with Tanqueray for a long time, developed training programs, so I love them as a liquid. Thank you very much. And to a certain extent, now I figure you're going to do exactly what I do, but now I'll get flown business class, not economy, which will be better for me, etc. And, give me a bigger soapbox to stand on top of. And that was fine. I was hired, several interviews, and then hired for the role. But 2 weeks into my job, the global brand manager for Tanqueray No. 10, his wife was diagnosed with a large tumor. And so he stepped out of the business to nurse her back to health, never came back to the business. But the problem was, I was someone's big idea. Now that person wasn't in the business. And so I was just cut adrift slightly. They had this wonderful program, the Tanqueray 10 Guild, or the Martini Guild.
Yeah.
Massively expensive to activate. Created by a marketing company, and all the markets, the 10 markets around the world, were like, we hate this. We don't want to do this. It's too expensive. It's ridiculous. So I was basically left with nothing really to do. We had no budget at all in any way. I think my travel budget for the year was £12,000, which for Diageo is like 2 flights, shall we say.
Yeah.
And then they said, oh, by the way, the US, we got to relocate to Amsterdam as well. And I was like, right. And I go into the office, and I hate offices. Offices freak me out. I have no idea how offices work. But one day they were like, okay, the US would like you to go over there and they're doing a trial project on the best T&T, Tanqueray and Tonic. They're going to do a competition in 2 markets or 3 markets. They want you to go across and represent. So I was like, fine, went across. When I came back, they said, wow, actually, because of or despite Angus's Englishness, they really liked him. So can we use him more? But more importantly, it'd be a lot easier to use him if he wasn't based in Amsterdam. The global team were like, wicked, not a problem at all. You take him on. He'll be the global ambassador, but now based in the US. You pay his wages.
With the budget in the US.
And so I'm over there. The US was 75% of Tanqueray's market in those days.
Might as well be there anyway, right?
Might as well be there. So I then went over there, leaving this weird sort of gap of global ambassador elsewhere that sort of Barry Wilson filled. He became the global trade ambassador.
That's right.
And I'm like, well, I know what this is.
Yeah.
But the US hates, generally within Diageo, the US hate global. And all the global teams sit outside the US on the whole. And so, especially Tanqueray, were like, we're not going to do anything you say because we're selling 75% of it.
Yeah.
But it then meant I relocated over to the US and spent 7 or 8 years traveling around doing that as well. So
I remember you saying to me once you hadn't slept in the same bed for more than a week in 6 years or something like that.
I had a 3-year period where I didn't live anywhere at all because it made no sense to live anywhere. I mean, I was doing 28-week tours with 40 different cities, and I did a lot of not your New York and your San Francisco's, but your Des Moines and your Lincoln, Nebraska, and stuff like that. And I'd lived in the US again when I was a child with my father's job, so I knew about America and I'd driven across it several times. But it was just a lot of fun to see, not just the big bars and to see people at their first bars who've now gone on to become bar moguls and things, but to see that sort of development and to see the slow spread of craft cocktail markets away from New York and Chicago and things. I mean, I still remember going to New York and you bump into people and we all went to like the same 6 bars. It's like, right, I'm going to Milk and Honey, the Blue Owl, Freeman's, Pegu Club, and here. Oh, well, I'm going to the same bars but in a different order. And yet now, I mean, you go to places now like Cincinnati and Cleveland and they've got really cool little cocktail scenes.
Yeah, I mean, the cities that were there early, it's now impossible to visit all the good bars in a weekend as it used to be, or even in a night. And now there are so many more cities with good bars as well, so you've got to visit them too.
Yeah, and they're different in cultures. I mean, one of the things was, one of the activations I did, sounding all corporate, was I was fed up with LA bartenders saying, we're brilliant, New York bartenders suck. The only reason they get all the awards is because there was a time when you won a Spirited Award, you became a judge the next year. So it started to become self-referential. Yeah. So I was fed up with people in Chicago saying they were better bartenders than LA and things. So I did a thing with Sean Finter's Barmetrix software, where I spent 6 months driving around America, liaising with the USBG. But I would turn up in every market and I had a portable bar. It was my drinks, my recipes, my setup, etc. And I made bartenders make the same round of 4 drinks, which if I remember rightly was a Southside Fizz, a Negroni, a Tanqueray and tonic and a green basil smash. And so it was the same 4 drinks. And then we would measure the bartenders using Barmetrix's proprietary software, which was awesome. So pouring accuracy, speed, memory, numeracy, technique, etc. to see who was the best bartenders in America by something that was metrical, as opposed to the subjective. Oh my God, he makes a wonderful martini. And weirdly, Miami came out top in terms of speed, accuracy, and things like that.
You've got to think that the best city at that kind of thing is some way culturally pressured towards efficiency. And Miami, I guess, big tourism.
Turn and burn.
Got to turn it out.
Absolutely. I mean, back in the day of having, I think you talked about Film Cocktail, the book. You ever read the book? It's a fantastic book. Everything you know from the film basically happens in about...
I did not know it was based on a book.
Hayward Gould. I mean, it's great. I mean, Brian Flanagan, when you meet him, is an old bartender walking through Manhattan. And if he can't get a job by the time he gets to Brooklyn, he's going to throw himself off Brooklyn Bridge. And he ends up getting a job down in the South Street Seaport. And there's one bit of flair in it where he's making a zombie, I think it is, and he's layering stuff, and it's like his test. But in there, they talk about different types of bartenders, and he says, I'm a mechanic in terms of I go behind the bar and I'm cranking this stuff out, not brilliantly well set up bars and things like that. But you do get these nowadays. You get people who, Alex Turner used to work service bar at Planet Hollywood. And you were only allowed to work service bar once a week because it was so intense. Alex didn't really like customers or didn't like the guests that they got in Planet Hollywood, so he would swap with people. But in there, you were the service bartender for 480 restaurant guests. I mean, they would go through like 10 tubs, like 1 gallon tubs of strawberries blended up to make a strawberry puree in the Home Alone cocktail or the Cliffhanger cocktail. And you do get people who are absolute, you want them on your service well. They are turn and burn bartenders. And Miami is filled with, high volume tourists, got to crank this stuff out as quickly as possible because you made more money, making 10%.
Yeah.
Whereas, you get Brian Miller to make the same round of drinks and it would take him 8.5 minutes. And it would take a Miami bartender 2 minutes and 5 seconds to make. And it's like, right, the amount of money, I'm not going to say about the quality of the drink, but it had the right ingredients in it in the right proportions because we were measuring things like that. But it made a big difference.
So fond memories of the Tanqueray stint. That's how when I first met you, and certainly when a lot of people I think really started to, my generation of bartenders started to notice you, because you did very much epitomize that brand ambassador thing.
It was early days. I mean, Phil Duff had been the global brand ambassador for Bowls. Jacob Ryers had been the global ambassador for 42 Below. But try and name any other ambassadors beyond that. I mean, before that, theoretically, John Tanqueray was the Tanqueray global ambassador.
Didn't go back to the old blenders of whiskey and everything, like Alexander Walker and Tommy Dewar and all that kind of thing, but they were brand owners as well.
Yeah, I mean, you had the ambassadors. I mean, I forget which was, but like a Champagne Charlie is an expression. It was because of an ambassador for them, etc. So, I'm going to say, it was myself for Tanqueray 10. You had Lorena Vasquez for Zacapa. You had Jason Bowden, who you probably don't remember, for Kettle One. It was a great marketeer, but didn't resonate with bartenders in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
He did like the Kettle One toolkits and all that side of things. And he did some amazing ways of describing vodka, for example. How do you work for a company that has Kettle One on one hand, which is all about flavor, and Smirnoff on the other hand, which is about neutrality? How do you do it without being rude about the other one type thing? He created some great stuff. But I was lucky that, especially when I went to the US, they just trusted me. And they were like, we want to get more people doing this, or we have 4 pillars on the rocks with juice in a martini or with tonic. Build training programs that encompass that information, but resonate with bartenders. They never told me, you need to say this, you need to say that. They were like, we need to do something about ice, because one of our marketing strategies is Wrexham Rocks. That's fucking terrible. But at the same time, I can talk about ice within cocktails and bartending and different types of ice and large format ice and ice cutting, ice. I can do all of that. That's fantastic. I'll build that put together. And I gave them a repertoire of like 12 different sessions. And I had a lot of fun. I mean, one of my favorite ones that I did over there was, I did one called Bartender Voodoo. Because I ended up, started off being, me with a suitcase, traveling around the country. I ended up with my entire library over there of 2,000 books, all the cocktail shakers and weird equipment that I'd picked up whilst you could still do that on eBay, etc. So martini scales and martini spikes and all that sort of stuff. I ended up with a truck, with 4 portable bars, big, proper setup portable bars. I had roadies and stuff.
Well, it does sound a lot like being in a rock band, right? You're constantly on tour. You've got trucks of equipment and roadies following you around, and then you get there and do your performance and fuck off again.
Absolutely. And I mean, I brought yourself across as part of that. I brought Sean Finter. He started with doing stuff for owners and managers. The favorite one I did was Bartender Voodoo. The idea being, some of the coolest cocktails now, the Aviation, the Last Word, the Hanky Panky, they were standard drinks 70 years ago, but we forgot about them.
Yeah.
So on these shelves are shitloads of really good books. What I want you to do is I want you to go through, find a recipe that you like the look of. And it came because there was a drink in Mr. Boston called the Vegetarian Gin Cocktail, I think, which was gin, mint, and rhubarb.
Right.
And I made it, and it was terrible, but I realized that it was terrible because it was just out of balance.
Yeah.
So the idea was...
How was the mint and rhubarb incorporated?
I couldn't even remember now type thing, but I was like, vegetarian? This is weird. But, so the project was, find a recipe that you think sounds good, make it exactly how the drink is, and then tweak it, but don't add anything to it. Don't add more bitters or add different bitters and juice.
Just tweak the ratio.
Just tweak the ratio, and let's see if we can come up with the next Aviation, the next Last Word, the next Hanky Panky. And I still have a book somewhere of some of the best bartenders in America going through, and things like the Dunhill cocktail, the Lord Help Us cocktail. Certain books like Crosby Gage's The Ladies' Cocktail Companion were really popular. And people finding really obscure drinks and trying to sort of bring them back using different variants. And I love that as an idea, because the idea that we were raising cocktails from the dead, effectively.
Yeah. So that's why it's voodoo, right? Got you.
I mean, it allowed me to talk slightly about voodoo, that, we only know bad voodoo, whereas voodoo was sort of like Christianity. It was a religion down there, but they allowed me to do what I wanted to do, and that was great. But I got to a stage where I felt morally, I'd sort of felt there was no new information about Tanqueray. I couldn't rediscover new information. People like yourself did after a bit, because you really dug into the research, but I'm on the road the entire time. And also, increasingly, bartenders were asking more and more obscure questions, and I was like, you want to know the angle of the lime pipe, or you want to know what proof it comes off the still at. I mean, have guests changed? Do guests ask things like this? I mean, So I stepped back because I was like, look, at the end of the day, I could continue to do this, but I've done all the stuff that really interests me and intrigues me and things. And I've told them everything there is to know. But I also felt very much that I was, as a lot of people did in those days, with Tom Nicol, but I mean, he was the third master distiller I knew. Sean Phillips was before him, and Hugh Williams was old school before him. I worked with all three of them. They were really, holding on to Charles Tanqueray's legacy. And I know you want to talk about gin, but to see some of the shocking iterations of Tanqueray that are coming out, Blackcurrant Royale, they do a spirits drink now at 30% alcohol.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I didn't know the other two distillers you made, but I do know Tom Nicol pretty well. And I know that because all that stuff was starting just as he was leaving. Yeah. And the state of it now with all of the different, I mean, I don't even know all the expressions. I haven't allowed space in my brain to store them. But it's crazy, and it goes very much against the ethos of what the brand was, which was we just make Tanqueray and Tanqueray 10.
Yeah, but also that Charles Tanqueray was a genius and had incredible recipes, etc. Yeah. But for example, they decided to bring back Old Tom. I mean, I said for a long time, the problem with Old Tom is there's no rules for it. I can get a bottle of Patron and write Angus's Old Tom gin, and no one could stop me. There's no juniper recipe, anything like that. So I said, look, we used to sell one. Why don't we bring it back? Because then it would be like we have the classic London dry gin, the benchmark in terms of Tanqueray export, whatever you want to call it. We have the benchmark for New Western dry gin. And remember when that was a thing, New Western, botanicals sharing the stage with. But also we could be the benchmark now for Old Tom. And that was fine. And I remember...
But they were too late bringing it out, I think. I mean, it was better late than never, but also... That was being talked about a long time before it was eventually released.
Absolutely. I mean, Heyman's had come out with one, that you also had whatever the ransom was. But the fact they were all radically different. It was just like, wait there.
And Jameson's as well.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, but this you can say, we used to sell this 100 years ago.
We had the recipe.
But when it came across the first time, the brand manager brought one across to allow myself and Sean Kenyon, who was a player in the Denver scene, to taste it. We were like, it's really interesting. Where's the sweetener from? And they're like, it's a pineapple syrup. And we were like, okay, is that traditional? And they're like, no, we just thought because the pineapple logo would be interesting. I was like, look, Tom Nicol made this and that's fine. We should call it New Tom, but we need to do the Old Tom that we used to sell. Yeah. Like, you can't start messing about with it. Yeah. And the other one, he was the one.
And of course, you could tweak like you're saying with the classic cocktails, you could tweak the ratios if necessary based on what the ingredients are available now and how intense they are, but don't start adding new stuff.
Yeah, don't start and saying this is what it was. But the other one that Tom was always very interested in doing was one that was called Buck Strong, but of course it was never allowed to be called Buck Strong because strong. The Diageo's lawyers will never allow that. Yes. But I think it was what ended up being Bloomsbury, but it was the original recipe had 3 different types of juniper in it. And it was just, okay, that's... And again, now you get brands like Heppel that absolutely live that sort of stuff. But the Diageo people were like, actually, it doesn't need 3 different types. And I'm like, Charles Tanqueray would say that it did. And I think, as I say, the fact they never celebrated, his birthday, the fact they never celebrated, there were anniversaries of like, it's been 200 years since he was doing this, with 180 years. You've created Arthur Guinness Day if it's been 200 years since he signed a lease. Why isn't Tanqueray getting the same love? And the problem was, from a business point of view, is that Tanqueray was a wholly owned brand, whereas they were doing all of these joint ventures, Kettle One, Zacapa, they had to hit targets, Ciroc, where they had to pump money in. Where does that money come from? You pull it from the brands that you own. When I started, I think Tanqueray's US budget was $37 million. When I left, Tanqueray's US budget was $4 million.
Wow.
And yet sales were going up. But it was like, okay, well, it's great. Sales are going up. We don't have to spend as much money as we were before. That's all your advertising going. One of the problems I had when I first went to the US is Tanqueray had an advertising campaign on television and in print with a guy called Tony Sinclair, who was African-American with an English accent. He was actually American, but he put on an English accent, all very sort of Tony and like, oh, cheers. And when I would go to different markets, people would be like, oh, it's the global ambassador for Tanqueray. And they'd turn up and be like, you're not Tony Sinclair. I'm like, he's a fucking actor, for God. He's not even American. But no, I'm the ambassador. He's the spokesperson. But yeah, it was, a lot of fun. It allowed me to travel around the world. No, I didn't do it in business class, unfortunately.
There's something to be said for that kind of carte blanche autonomy thing, right? Which so often doesn't happen these days. Brand ambassadors are very much scripted in what they can and can't do. And I feel, and this sort of rings true, I think, for really any job, and certainly jobs in hospitality. You employ the right person in the first place and then give them the autonomy they need, you're going to get results.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking with Nidal Ramini earlier. I saw him, I haven't seen him for 10 years. He's doing advocacy for Brown Forman, and he was like, one of the things I did was move the advocacy team from the sales team to the marketing team. And I think now an awful lot of ambassadors are basically sales functionals, whereas I wasn't. And I was like, it was the early days. And as I say, they gave me my thread. We used to say an ambassador is someone who translates marketing into bartender and translate bartender back into marketing. It's the person on the ground who sees opportunities and lets you know, etc. But as soon as you get into the, okay, why don't you delist this product and list my product, you lose that credibility.
Yeah, and but the problem is, of course, from the brand side that, you know, if you don't have sales targets, then it's like, well, how do we put a value on you? What are you actually doing for us? And of course, it's so hard. It's so intangible, right? It's like, well, I'm educating, right? Well, how much did we sell as a result of that? Well, it was hard to say, you know?
Yeah. And that was, I mean, after I did the ambassador thing, one of the things I was really interested in is, of course, the bartenders get everything nowadays. Like competitions, ambassadors visit them all the time, trips to distilleries, if it's legal in those countries. Bartenders are getting everything. I mean, it's never been a better time to be a bartender in terms of the amount of information, resources, money spent on you. But owners and managers were getting nothing. And I'd worked when I was in La Cantina. I'd started off as a bartender. When I finished university, I ended up being the general manager there. And I'd tell the story that I remember the day they promoted me. And I was like, my mum's going to be so happy. I'm a manager. And they, doubled my hours, halved my salary, took away my cool T-shirt, gave me a button-down shirt. And suddenly I'm in charge of a business. I fired somebody after the first week, older than me, who burst into tears. I mean, I was told to fire him, but I spoke to someone, they're like, did he know he was going to get fired? I said, no. He said, yeah, you fucked up there. Because he should have been told, you're not good enough, you need to improve, otherwise this is going to happen. So I had worked with Sean Finter for a long time, since, seen him before and worked with him, with Tanqueray stuff and things like that. I lived in Sydney doing some work for him down there. I lived over in Canada when they launched Barmetrix over there. So he had developed a program, and I helped via introduction to get him into Diageo, but he developed a program called the Business of Bars, which was entirely business coaching. And I'm a big educator, as you know, but there is a difference between a teacher, a trainer, a coach, and a mentor. And I think, those differences are being lost now as people just throw the word mentor in all the time incorrectly. But the idea of being a coach, but more importantly, working with businesses, working with managers and owners to really give them business basics, but also to make them feel good some of the time by saying, it's not your fault, but it is your problem. And between us, we can do this. And the idea was that Diageo, via their distribution team, would provide this, but would never ask, they wouldn't say, they launched, before the Bar 5-day program and Bar Ready and Bar Smarts, that was a Diageo project. But Diageo said, we will give you this amazing training, but you have to have Tanqueray in the well, Smirnoff in the well, etc. And the problem was, they did it, and then as soon as the training was finished, they took the product out of the well. So that sense of measurement and how you did it. So instead of sort of having this, we'll do something for you, or you do something for us, we'll do something for you, Business of Bars was the other way around. It was like, we want to come in and help you. And we're not going to say you need to pour Johnnie Walker. We're not going to say you need to do this. But after a bit, we'll have developed a relationship, and you sort of like, how can we help you? You haven't asked for anything. And you're like, well, actually, it would be cool if you could put Johnnie Walker in a cocktail. It would be good if you could use this product, etc. But again, that sense of measurement, is it a direct bump in sales? One of the big problems with drinks companies in general, Diageo, we can keep talking about that because I have the most experience. I've worked with everybody over time. But the problem in Diageo is you've got a brand manager who's there for 2 years. Then they're going to get moved on to another brand. So they're not looking at something that's going to develop a bigger market in 5 years' time. That's not their issue. They want to come out with a new flavor because that will add an extra 20,000 cases into the distributor pipeline.
They'll have done their job, and then they can move on to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. Redesigning packaging. They just redesigned the Tanqueray bottle. Like, why? Like, the liquid's great. Yes, in the UK, it's 41.3%, which is execrable. But at the same time, did people say, I love Tanqueray, but I really think the bottle's not very good? But no, the brand manager gets to work with a cool agency, Mother or Wyden & Kennedy or some really cool agency who get lauded, etc. And you come up with a new package, and you're like, do we need a new package? We remember Plymouth, did the sort of blue Art Deco-y bottle. Then they moved into that sort of greenish glass one that was like, it's terrible in the well. Bartenders don't like it. They're smashing
And
it.
it's 50% more expensive all of a sudden.
Yeah. So, but it's just like, who decided we needed a new package for this?
Sticking with gin, actually, I want to take you back to 2006, where you attended the Global Gin Symposium.
Was there Electric Cinema?
At Electric Cinema in Notting Hill, alongside such an illustrious cast as Nick Blacknell, Geraldine Coates, Audrey Saunders, Philip Duff, and Anastasia Miller and Jared Brown. You were at Tanqueray at the time?
No, Henry Besant and Dre Masso were there as well, etc.
I don't have a full list of these, but two more significant people.
It was the luminaries of the industry, etc. I mean, I loved that because I think I had to do a talk about maybe forgotten gin cocktails.
Right.
And I used to talk about the Dog's Nose as being a great example of how the English should not invent cocktails. Because the Dog's Nose was a pint of warmed Guinness with a double shot of gin, a large spoonful of brown sugar, and with nutmeg grated on the top. Now, I'd always talked about this, but it
Sounds like a really shit espresso martini.
And I was just like, look, it sounds horrible. Double shot of gin into a pint of warmed Guinness. Oh, fuck. But we made it. Universally, people were like, this is gorgeous.
Oh, yeah?
This is awesome.
I bet that fucked you up as well, doesn't it?
We only had samples back then. But, I mean,
It would though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
I did it once. I did it in Rain's Law Room when I did a guest bartender shift at Rain's Law Room. And I said, look, I need to warm up the Guinness. And they're like, oh, we've got this like mulled wine blender.
oh, so it's warm. When you say warm Guinness, you mean actually warm Guinness, not like room temperature.
Not room temperature.
Oh, right. So it's actually a bit like Pearl, like the namesake of my first cocktail.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm an old enough bartender to remember when Guinness was only room temperature.
Yeah.
Then you had like extra cold Guinness, and before you know it, there's no room temperature Guinness
No, it's all
anymore.
cold now.
It's
isn't
all
it?
cold,
Yeah.
super
cold and extra cold.
But so I was doing this guest bartender shift, and they're like, "Oh, we've got this sort of we're making mulled wine. It just sits there and blends really slowly." I was like, "Cool." So I put the gin, put the Guinness in. That was all fine. Wait until just before the event, and I'm like, "I better turn it on now." Turned it on, not thinking, of course, that Guinness is sort of carbonated.
Yes.
So I turn this thing on and turn around and look back, and it's like one of those
kids' volcano experiment.
Absolute. All over Rain's Law Room, just every flat surface in there was covered
Angus
in
is
Guinness.
here.
And it's on there. We open in 1 minute time. That's fuck. But I mean, that was an amazing event. I was always remember it was slightly embarrassing because I think Audrey said one of the reasons I love Beefeater is 47% alcohol, and everyone was like, "Not every year, it's not." She's like, "Okay."
But the reason I mention the event is because illustrious crew there, but also it feels like. Clearly these things don't happen overnight, but it feels like that may have been one of the sort of key turning points in the stratospheric growth of the gin category. It would have been before Sipsmith, before any new gin distilleries in the UK, but not long before. And we know what happened after then. So I'm interested to hear from you about whether you could feel it coming, or if the mood was like, this is gin's time, so everything's about to change, and then obviously your opinion on what's happened since as well.
Well, part of my training was always about how gin, for example, was the most cosmopolitan spirit because everything else was made basically from a raw material or a waste product made locally, etc. It's like, this is what we got, let's turn it into something. Whereas gin, you couldn't make gin unless you were connected to a global network.
That's interesting.
The idea of having nutmeg and cloves, the idea of lemon peel, orange peel. I mean, that's why the UK did so well, and the Dutch to a certain extent, because they had these global trading networks. I said it's also something that, to a certain extent, you don't drink neat. Gin is drunk in cocktails. Yeah. And so, as cocktail culture was rising, I said, look, read the Savoy cocktail book. It's basically a gin cocktail book. Gin has that incredible versatility because of the magic of juniper. One bottle of a good London dry gin from the bitterest ingredients, Campari, tonic water, Angostura bitters, all the way through to cream. First cocktail I ever drank was a Brandy Alexander. Now realizing, of course, that a Brandy Alexander was the brandy version of the classic gin Alexander. And a great Alexander is a wonderful drink. So I think as bartending has progressed and cocktail culture has progressed, so gin was going to progress as well. So those two things were tied up.
Hand in hand, yeah.
Yeah, and it was wonderful from that point of view. However, then as gin started to become cool, an awful lot of people were like, I don't like gin. My younger brother, been in the industry for a long time, etc., he used to do events with me, for Tanqueray events. He was like, I fucking hate gin. I'm like, don't tell Tanqueray that. But he came back to me after a bit and said, what I've realized is I don't hate gin, I just hate gin and tonic. I hate tonic. And I didn't really realize how other ways of drinking it. Because again, remember martinis in those days, rinse the inside of the cocktail shaker with vermouth and throw it away, the vermouth that's been sitting on a back bar for the last 5 years. So, martini was a difficult drink. Suddenly, I say, far more versatility, and people started to realize gin was cool, but they didn't like the taste of gin. And so you started to get these, Hendrix was a classic example, Tanqueray 10 to a certain extent, but Ryan McGarian wrote the article about New Western Dry Gin, where he said, look, they're now sharing the stage with Juniper. And that's, he's still there. It's obviously a gin. Tanqueray No. 10 won best gin in the world for 3 years running or whatever. It's obviously a gin, but citrus, etc., etc. Yeah. These aren't these big Juniper beasts going forward. But Juniper, from a bartender's point of view, is crucial because it's the spine which you hang flavors on. So that was all fun. That's why, yes, Juniper flavored vodka, but why doesn't vodka have that versatility? It's just Viagra for limp mixers. It just alcoholizes things. So gin started to get at people who are like, oh, I don't like gin, but I want to drink gin because it's cool. So you started to get brands like Hendrix. You may remember Hoxton Gin, which, there was the gin experts had a Hoxton face, which was like, oh. First time I was given
coconut and
grapefruit, but pineapple.
Pineapple.
The first time I ever drank it, I thought that bartender was trying to fool me by mixing gin with Malibu. Yeah. They're like, oh, try this gin, to be like, oh, it's lovely.
It was the gin that people love to hate, right?
Absolutely. And the story went, Miss Jerry Calabrese, heritage, history. But the idea was that his girlfriend didn't like gin, so he wanted to make a gin that she would like. And I always said, look, if your girlfriend loves you, she's going to say whatever gin you make is fine. But secondly, she doesn't like gin. She likes, coconut and pineapple flavored gin. Yeah. So you're not doing people know it's a gateway. And people aren't going to go through that gateway and then left turn to Boodles and Sips.
No, I don't know. I get it from a flavor point of view, they're not, because they're not really tasting gin, but then they might then accidentally go, oh, well, you haven't got Hoxton, I'll try a different one. And then they've crossed that threshold.
And that would be a lovely idea. But of course, what happened was, how can we do it differently? How can we stand out? Whether it's, botanicals harvested within a 50-yard radius, or our chief forager is our 8-year-old daughter in the distillery. I remember reading about one that was made in a cupboard in a council house in Glasgow.
Wow.
And it was all like...
That is a USP.
It was like, it's a micro... And I'm like, you're promoting this as though this is a good thing. If you told me 20 years ago I was drinking something made in a cupboard in a council house in Glasgow, I'd be like, no thanks, etc. And it just became sillier and sillier. And salted caramel gin, ginger and rhubarb gin. I remember reading a stat when pink gin came out, that 29% of all the gin in England being drunk was pink gin.
Yeah, Gordon's Pink was the biggest selling gin for a while.
Absolutely, they loved that sort of thing. I remember when Gordon's came out they did a cucumber and elderflower, and the day that came out, the brand manager in the UK got sent a huge bouquet of flowers from Hendrix to say thank you. So I thought, that must have been an embarrassing one when it turned up in the office. But gin is transmogrified, and I'm blackballed from the Gin Guild because of an argument you and I had online about martinis.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I got dragged into Diageo's offices and be like, what the fuck, you were one of the first people to be invited and you couldn't make it because you were traveling, but now you've been blackballed. And I was just like, okay, fine, I don't really give a shit. But I think, gin is defined by the dominant characteristic of juniper.
Yeah.
And so salted caramel gin and, rose petal, this isn't gin. And the problem is, we saw it with vodka, that you had vodka and that was great, and then you got flavored vodka and that was pretty good, and then it was Pinnacle's imitation whipped cream flavored vodka.
Yeah.
It was massively popular for a year with basically cougars in America. But everyone was like, oh my God, look at it, like the pink gin, a million cases in a year, we need to do this. And so you ended up with Smirnoff fluff marshmallow, whipped marshmallow, Mountain Dew flavored, Rangtang, which you go on to Urban Dictionary and see what rangtang means. You really don't want to name your flavor of vodka after it, etc. And the problem was that it just became silly. And it hurt classic vodka. I worry that gin will get to this, we've jumped the shark so heavily. And it'll just negatively affect the entire category.
You don't think it's there yet, then?
I think it is. But when people ask you about trends and stuff, you're like, I operate trends on so many different levels. But, there are still some incredible gins coming out. Caprolius Swift is unbelievable gin. I had a really nice gin in Ukraine the other day. But on the whole,
But when the market's so saturated with nonsense, it's going to be very hard, even if you've got a great gin, to get your head above the parapet.
and also, I mean, let's not forget from a business point of view, yes, bartenders like bright, shiny and new, thank you very much, oh, squirrel, all that sort of stuff. And so, you build your brand in a bar, but the volume comes from off-premise. The idea being that I had this cool brand in it, but now I want to buy it in a supermarket. But supermarkets, they don't care how cool you are. You want to get listed? Not a problem at all. £25,000. You want to be on a shelf that's not tucked away down there? That's an extra £10,000. You're starting to see some celebrity gins, and I think that is obviously, potentially showing a tipping point. But you look at it from a business point of view and say, okay, this is a fantastic liquid, but it's never going to be a house gin. Where's your volume coming from?
Yeah.
I think I was talking with Jack Sotty yesterday about Renee Gin, which is Emma Watson's gin. And her brother was an ex-Diageo guy, and it's just like, okay, this is cool, but where's the volume coming from?
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to live off this? No, nobody's going to buy it off you.
Yeah, and so many of the brands in the UK seem to be sort of trading off their local area. It's like insert town here, gin, and unless that town is notable in some way, you've got to wonder where the market is outside of that town. And many of these towns now have more than one of those distilleries as well.
They opened a distillery, Toad, the Oxford Artisanal Distillery, at the top of my road, or the top of my mum's road. We went up there, and the master distiller was a cool bartender from New York who'd been renowned for his illegal absinthe that he made. And it's like, okay, fine. They were all about paleobotany. So it's like, we're using heritage grains for this. We make our own neutral spirits. I'm like, right, so you're taking a heritage grain and then you're stripping all of the flavor out to be able to make the gin on top of it. That's fine. Distill Ventures came along, invested in it. Thank you very much. They were making a rye as well and a couple of other things. Now they've come over and taken over the rest of the business, closed the distillery up there, moved the whiskey production up to Yorkshire for Fielden, and the gin is going to be made off-site over for Wood Brothers or, somewhere locally, but not anymore, that sense of Oxford.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, local, as we know, I read a stat the other day that 65% of 18 to 34-year-olds put local above taste when it comes to food and drink products. So I will buy something even if it doesn't taste as good or it's more expensive because it's made locally. And I think Austin were the first people to do that in America with Tito's. It was, Austin was all about keep Austin weird, and you launch something in Austin, they'd all over it straight away. And if you could use that to then segue that into other markets, as Tito's did, fantastic. But
it's interesting. So the whole flavoured and the two sides of the gin production is, first of all, weird botanicals, and then there's the flavouring after it's been distilled to make liqueurs and such like. I feel like this just plays out in so many industries. You see it with cider, we've seen it with vodka, vapes is another one as well, and alco pops. We see it with crisps. It's like, it's not enough just to have the sort of basic. For the mass market, you have to go to the sort of most extremes of possibility in order to have the appeal. And I wonder where the consumer behavior in that sits. Is it that everyone wants their sort of customized version, so I can get the sort of whipped cream vodka because that's my thing, and they get to feel special because of it?
I think I see it as being slightly infantilizing the whole thing.
Yeah,
it's like,
just appeals to the sweet shop in you.
Grown men shouldn't be sitting there and puffing on watermelon and passion fruit vapes.
Yeah.
It's just like, smoke or don't smoke, but don't have this weird halfway house. Drink alcohol, but not stuff that theoretically your kid would like if you gave him ice cream with a similar flavor.
Yeah, I mean, is it a nostalgia thing then? Do you think it's as simple as like, I liked eating candy when I was younger and this kind of reminds me of it?
No, you got to remember that both alcohol and nicotine, which we're talking about, are both massively addictive. And nicotine in particular. Yeah. So you have that aspect, and it's just like, okay, maybe I don't feel so bad now consuming it, but...
Oh, right, you think, but if you give it a sort of like child-friendly flavor to it, then it doesn't seem like it's such a vice.
But also, a lot of people don't like the taste of alcohol, but like the effect.
Right. Okay.
We sit there and love our single malts and our cognacs, neat spirits, that's absolutely fine. Remember the time when everyone had a bad time with tequila? Like, tequila was the devil's work, etc. You ask civilians, like, who likes tequila? No hands went up. Because they couldn't name the brand of tequila they drank, but they drank tequila shots at, like, Christmas parties.
Yeah.
And civilians don't drink an awful lot of shots of alcohol.
No.
And so, you blame tequila. You might sip a whiskey or sip a brandy, but your shots of tequila, And tequila had to shrug off that reputation for an awfully long time.
Well, and also, shots of tequila tend to come after a bottle of wine,
Absolutely.
3 pints.
Yeah, exactly. Get down a nightclub, all round the shots of tequila.
And then you blame the last thing you remember.
Absolutely. Tequila is the devil's work, etc. The other weird thing is, I mean, there are certain things in our industry that we seem to have completely forgotten ever happened. I mean, mezcal now, the coolest thing you could ever possibly wish to drink, etc. People seem to have completely forgotten when mezcal was, should we say, the one with the worm in it. And eating the worm, made you hallucinate and things. I remember that, and then I was in New York in 92, 93, and one day the liquor rep came in, and it was like, a mezcal. And I was, fuck off, I'm not doing that. He goes, no, this one's called Encantado. It's owned by the guys from Stag's Leap Winery. They went down to Mexico, they tried this mezcal, it's incredible. It didn't have a worm in it. And so they brought it back, and maybe for like 3-4 months, I was drinking Encantado mezcal in a very cool bottle with no worm on it, and it was unbelievable. And Google Encantado now, it's a really interesting story about how it happened and what happened and how it died and things, but it was at the same time that Patron came out. I remember going to a bar, DBA, in the East Village in New York, which I think is still there. I was with a couple of bartenders, but this was pre-bartender, we were just bartenders. We loved our craft and we loved all this. And the server was like, hey, what do you want to drink? And I was like, I don't know, something flashy. And she goes, you ever tried, do you like tequila? I said, yeah, I love tequila. She goes, have you ever tried Patron? I was like, no, I haven't. She goes, try it, it'll blow your mind. I'm like, I've drunk a lot of tequila in my time. I used to work in a Mexican restaurant. But she bought this over in a brandy snifter, silver tequila. And I tried it and I was like, unfucking believable. In those days, all the bottles were hand blown, so they had labels on that said
early 2000s?
No, this was 94, 95.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this was early.
Yeah, very early.
Siete Leguas was still making it, but then they advertised it in New York Magazine, and you couldn't buy it after that. It was out of stock because it was, made in really small quantities, packaging, etc. I mean, it was the guy behind Paul Mitchell hair care products.
Yes, Paul de Joria.
Yeah. And it was just like, wow, but it started to radically change the way people perceived tequila.
Yeah.
And as I say, a lot of people don't like the taste of alcohol. So if you make it taste of raspberry and passion fruit and all of these other flavors, then that's all good. And gin's done it, vodka's done it. I think you're going to start to see it in other spirits. I mean, how many orange whiskeys are there now? Jameson orange and Hague orange and things like that. And it's like,
it's accessibility, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, people don't like the taste of alcohol. That's why cocktails work, because you put raspberry and this and that and the other. I mean, the legacy of it's a great cocktail because I can't taste the alcohol. Well, it's a prohibition thing where, you're covering up the alcohol as opposed to emphasizing it. But yeah, it can be depressing. And flavored gin. Like, isn't gin already flavored? Like, where did that happen? Now, there are some incredible spirits out there that were calling themselves gin that I would struggle necessarily to pick as gin, but they're definitely interesting spirits. But there are a lot of, it's bubblegum flavored gin with glitter in it. And you're like, yeah, you don't know it, but you're harming the category. And I blackballed from the Gin Guild, but I always wanted the Gin Guilds to come back in and say, for example, 35% salted caramel gin is not gin. I mean, Pim's, number one, used to be gin-based. You can't see the word gin anywhere on it because it was 22% alcohol. Legally, gin needs to be 37.5%, so you can't call it gin. Even if it started off with gin, you shouldn't be able to do that. And I wanted the Gin Guild, like the Scotch Whisky Association, to really step in and say, no, you can't do this. The Portman Group, with its advertising and stuff, when they say you can't do it, brands stop. Whereas the Gin Guild were like, it's great. People are drinking more gin. It's wonderful. And you're like, you are cutting your own throat on this one.
Yeah.
Because it is going to be a backlash. And there are memes about people who think that loving gin is a personality trait, and it's gin time, it's gin o'clock.
But it's funny how that sentiment's changed. I mean, you remember, you go back 20, 25, 30 years, gin was like the drink that was consumed by kind of old cat ladies, and it just had no sort of appeal to it whatsoever. And I remember around 2000, around about the time I was legally allowed to start drinking, I got into gin then, and a friend of mine I was working with, we used to sit at the bar after work and drink gin and tonics, and we were kind of laughed at,
The cult of the gin and tonic, I went to... obviously worked in the Coven and worked to go traveling. My first stop was Hong Kong. My dad was based over there. I remember going to the Captain's Bar in the Mandarin Oriental, which in those days was the most important bar in Hong Kong. It's where all the taipans and all the heads of CEOs, etc., would go drinking. And I had asked for gin and tonic, and they asked me whether I wanted a particular gin, which was like radical. You got more than one gin? This is incredible.
And you're offering me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I can't remember if it was Gordon's or Tanqueray. I think it was probably Gordon's. It makes a better story if it was Tanqueray. But it came, lovely tall glass, lots of ice, wonderful wedge, tonic on the side. And it was just like, yeah, this is like an adult drink. This isn't a slosh it in with 2 cubes of ice coming out of a branded plastic bucket, etc. And to this day, occasionally I would meet people that, they were sort of like, when I was young, gin and tonic was like, it was an adult drink. It wasn't hiding the flavors. It was like, you need to like gin, you need to like alcohol. And it sort of made me feel taller and made me feel wiser. And it's the sort of thing I drink with my father-in-law, and that sort of thing. You're like, okay, cool.
I just remembered one of the world-class competitions which we were both involved with was on a cruise ship. And you and I were scheduled to have a debate to an audience about new gin. And I think you were fighting the juniper side of the argument, and I was doing the alternative, which wouldn't exactly be where I put myself, but obviously you muscled into the juniper one. Being that you were the Tanqueray ambassador, that kind of made sense. Do you remember what happened?
Well, I remember that they screwed up the timing.
That's it.
So
I'm glad you started with that bit.
Yeah. No, they screwed up the timing, and they were calling you, and you were running the bar.
Yeah, well, we were running a bar, but this was the debate was supposed to take place in the afternoon.
Supposedly, yes,
yeah.
but
then they changed the timing. You were notified about it, but I was not.
Yeah.
And I think we'd been docked in Ibiza, so I had a very heavy night. We'd been doing the bar on the ship, and then we'd gone out afterwards. Very heavy, typically Ibiza-y night. Didn't get in till, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, maybe even later. And then went to bed, and
you got a call at like, where the hell are you?
You're
supposed to be
8 a.m. or something.
Yeah.
And I kind of threw myself in the shower, burnt my face in hot water, threw a suit on, and then came to this theatre, which was like, 40, 50 people waiting.
All important guests from around the world imported by markets.
And you were sat there like you are now, on a chair opposite, and there's an empty
Good of you
chair.
to join us, Tristan.
Yeah, and I was still drunk. There's no way. The hangover wasn't even close to kicking in. They gave me like a litre of coffee, which helped, and somehow I muddled through my part of this debate. God knows what I was saying.
Yeah, I just think, I like debate, I like argument, because otherwise you sit in your own echo chamber, your own bubble, and you're only surrounded
Challenge your own ideas, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can have your opinion. Everyone's entitled to opinion as long as you can justify it. So I want to hear your arguments, and hey, occasionally I want to have my mind changed because you presented with new information or a different perspective on looking at it. And, I like to be able to have that mental flexibility to be able to hold 2 different positions. I could have quite easily taken your position, and you could have done mine.
And that's the skill of a good debater, if you can hold both positions. But it's challenging your own position, but also sometimes in verbalizing your beliefs, you can actually reaffirm your own position. You're like, actually, I've never thought about putting it that way, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. A lot of my early job, especially, was trying to sort of put a lot of what you were talking about, bartender styles or cocktails or creativity, things like that. I used to talk about skills of the bartender, knowledge, speed, or knowledge, efficiency, style, and service. And people would say, what about creativity? And I'm like, I don't think creativity is an essential skill of the bartender. Think about being a musician. Like, most great musicians are not writing the music or writing the lyrics or the great music. If you can be a great musician, if you can play lots of instruments, if you can read sheet music, if you can understand what changing tempo or pitch will do to something, etc. You do not have to write the next one. The Lennons and McCartneys of this world, absolutely, they're so far above everybody else. So you don't need to be a creative bartender. Honestly, just learn 100 classic cocktail recipes, understand the Mr. Potato Head theory of bartending. That's 10,000 drinks straight away. You know what I mean? It's just like, right, I can learn a Collins and I can make you 50 different variations of a Collins.
What's the Mr. Potato Head theory?
Well, Mr. Potato Head's an American toy type thing. And the idea is that you have eyes and nose and ears are sort of interchangeable. And basically, a Collins is, spirit, citrus,
Okay.
sugar, carbonate, etc.
Just switch out.
Yeah, you're just right. Vodka, gin, white rum, etc. Let's change the carbonate. Ginger ale.
You've got a different cocktail name now. You got a different
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, I'll put champagne in it. I'll put tonic water in it. And now, of course, you don't just have one tonic water. You've got 17 different types of tonic water. But people would say, how many cocktails do you know? I'd say, I can make 10,000 drinks. How do you remember them all? Like, I don't. I remember 50 drinks, and I understand how they work and the variations that you can have within them, which is just changing products in and out. I mean, take an old-fashioned. Make an old-fashioned with anything nowadays. Rum, gin, tequila, sweetener, change that. Bitters, change that.
Yeah.
Ooh, let's put something in the ice cube. So
You got 100 different cocktails right there, haven't you?
yeah, but trying to simplify things so that people can understand it.
Yeah,
Talking about
sure.
styles of bartending, it's like dancing. There are so many different styles of dancing, and jazz and hip-hop and funk and swing and classical ballet. And bartending is the same. That, Japan, are the bartenders dip better? No. But they're doing Argentinian tango. They're doing classical ballet. And they make it look so effortless and so beautiful until you try and do it and see how difficult it is. So the idea of taking ways to take complex ideas and simplify them, especially for civilians, as I call them, non-bartender people, etc. How you take, who's a good bartender, what makes a good bartender, is creativity important? And I think, we all talk about how we over-fetishize hard work in the industry. I think now within the bartending industry, we over-fetishize creativity. When somebody tells me we're redefining the martini experience, I'm like, no, you're trying to sell me something? But the martini experience didn't need to be redefined. And you're also not redefining it. Innovation. We give awards now for innovation. I'm still not sure whether innovation is doing something differently or doing something differently that other people say, that's brilliant, I want to do that as well. So, I'd not throw people under the bus, but Ian McPherson up in Scotland with switching, and it's great if you've got medical grade freezers and things like that, but, is that a new thing in the way that a flamed orange zest was an innovative, that was an innovative garnish. So weirdly, I did a talk the other day, Kinetic Hospitality, where I talked about the tools that a bartender could use to make people interact and engage. And a flamed orange zest used to be the easiest thing. And I mentioned the flamed orange zest, the garnish for a Cosmopolitan. I was met with blank stares from the audience, and this is Athens Bar Show, so it's 100 hardcore people. Apparently now the Cosmopolitan is garnished with a dehydrated lime wheel.
Oh.
As standard, not a flamed orange zest. They looked at me as though I was talking complete gibberish.
No way.
Yeah, which is just sort of weird.
Yes.
But it's just sort of things like that. It's simplifying, but we over-fetishize creativity, over-fetishize innovation. We've lost the balance where bartenders were, you're a marriage guidance counselor, you're, a concierge, you're the fixer-upper and things like that. It's no longer about the human beings. It's about the product. It's about, and partially it's because of people like brand ambassadors. Nobody would know who I was without Tanqueray. And as you say, that's when I started to become, I've been doing good stuff, great work, etc. But drinks companies effectively have sort of co-opted the hospitality industry and made it all about the history of this. Nobody's asked me the history of Appleton rum, but I've run so many training sessions about the history of Appleton rum to bartenders. It's about now the product. And because it's about the product, it's about the innovation. We're doing it differently. Can I get a Tanqueray martini? Sure, but have you tried this? I was like, I'm sorry, do your ears not work? I want a Tanqueray martini. You've got it. Why are you trying to sell me something else? Because I've been told this one's better. But we over-fetishize creativity. We over-fetishize innovation. I freak bartenders out now by asking them to tell me a joke. And they look at me like I've asked them for a dead baby. That's not my job. I think an awful lot of the lauded bartenders of today would have been chefs 20 years ago. Because they love working with seasonality, they have foragers, they're working with flavors and things like
maybe
that.
we borrowed too much from the kitchen,
Yeah, I just think, I remember in the early days of craft bartending in America, someone saying, I love craft bartending because I hate dealing with customers and there's so much to do, stirring and shaking and layering and et cetera, that I don't have time to talk to guests. And it's like, guests are why you do this.
Yeah.
Like, you can't lose sight of that. But yeah, I think it's interesting to see how things have changed. But I see people talking about us people in the drinks industry. I'm like, I'm not in the drinks industry. I've worked in the drinks industry, but if I'm working in a bar, I'm in the hospitality industry. There is a Venn diagram that crosses over with it, but hospitality industry and drinks industry are separate industries. Bacardi, Coca-Cola, Heineken, drinks industry. Bar groups, etc. That's hospitality. And hotel groups and restaurant groups and things like that. But it seems now, and maybe pandemic, a lot of the time now, it seems to be we've conflated the two. It's the drinks industry.
Also, you know, pay to play as well. You only got listing fees going on, and the brand has sort of taken a slice of the bar in a way, you know, chuck a load of cash in, although that's, I think, happening a little bit less these days, certainly with smaller bars anyway.
It goes in waves. I remember from Allied Domecq days, it was just like, right, yes, you had, I mean, they were A&P budgets, the idea that, you know, this is the advertising and promotion budget per case. So if you sell 500 cases, I've got £5 each A&P. I get $2,500 to spend with you. It's how I spend it. Do I give you $2,500 cash? I always remember meeting Douglas Anchor once with about half a dozen Prada bags. I was like, been a good day, is it? He goes, yeah, we just got the listing fee from Absolute. Douglas, you're a player. Thank you very much. Or, you know, you wanted it to do something that would benefit the brand, a mural on the back bar, that sort of thing. But it would go in waves that they'd be like, oh, well, Cuervo were offering me this amount. And I'd be like, okay, well, take it. Because I guarantee you in a year's time, I won't be offering you any money in normal Cuervo because that money's gone.
Yeah.
Of course, in the US, all of that stuff is illegal. Like brands can't do anything of any real note with bars. Yeah. And it's limited to $5 per bartender is the amount. You can't fly them to a distillery because that's commercial bribery. You can't do half the stuff. No listing fees.
How does it? Is it the same situation in the pharmaceutical industry as well, with doctors and surgeons?
No, I mean completely.
Because that's where you really don't want people to be taking kind of benefits from. Right. It's drugs. Like.
You see ads on television saying, "Ask your doctor if X is right for you." And the idea is that you go along and say, "Hey, I saw this ad for Levitra or whatever. I think it's going to solve the problem I've got. Can I have it?" And the doctor's like, "Yeah, of course you can."
Yeah, I mean, that just seems it's a ridiculous double standard.
Yeah, I mean, yes, doctors can recommend that you should go on medication, but the problem is that medication is so bloody expensive in America that you doubt what the doctor's doing it. But yeah, I mean, the whole, you know, the OxyContin, that whole thing was like, yeah, we are massively incentivizing doctors to prescribe this.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, pay-to-play payola, which used to be about music. The record companies would pay radio stations to play the music, and if you didn't play, you didn't get... You know. So you have those aspects, but it does mean that, for example, American bars struggle in top 50, 50 best, and things like that to compete with, because a bar in London is being given £150,000 by Bacardi to put 8 drinks on the menu, etc.
Yeah, and the judging panel is a lot of Bacardi people or whatever.
No, I mean, I don't think that there's a bias from that point of view, but the problem is you can have signature glassware built for you. I mean, nowadays you look at Paradiso.
Oh, you're just saying it's an advantage because they've got the cash.
They're being given.
Right.
Declan McGurk said, I think the last deal he signed at the Savoy was for £1 million.
Yeah.
And it's just like, right, like a brand company is giving you £1 million to do cool stuff. And the cool stuff could be new jackets and blazers. It could be trips. It could be a whole bunch of stuff. Fur-lined coasters. I remember the days of the Artesian when it was just like, you've got to put a hat on when you drink this drink.
Yes.
You've got to stare at yourself.
Wearing various different things in that bar, yeah.
So, but it was, I mean, when that crew left, you know, when Alex and Simone left and the entire team left, they got a new bar manager in, a new crew. He left after 3 or 4 months because he wanted to change the menu. But the problem was that the brand companies who paid money to be on that menu didn't want the menu changed. And he said, I can't work. This isn't my menu. Everyone who was involved with this menu has left. You've got to help me. And they were like, sorry, contract's been signed. But you can't compete if you're running a small bar in New York. You can't compete with a small bar in London because they are being given brand support.
But also, I do think, I mean, you know, this isn't a conspiracy theory, but obviously a lot of people on these panels work for brands, whether directly or indirectly. And, you know, if you're a brand ambassador for Diageo and you're asked to pick your top 5 bars in the world, you're not likely to pick a bar that is, you know, tied to the hilt with Pernod Ricard, for example.
No, but I think, I mean, people say that, and that's fine. And I was a Academy member for 50 Best, etc. for some time. I never got any pressure at all from any brands I worked for. When I was working for Tanqueray, I never got any pressure for that at all.
Well, no, but I mean, I've been on the panel as well before, and obviously I don't work for a brand, so I've not got any pressure either. However, it looks good if the bars that you've put product into are high up on that list.
Maybe when they started to do the sort of brand report afterwards, because there it is, say, what are you pouring? What's on that? No, yes, you're going to have that, but I don't know. I mean, I think I'm old-fashioned. I mean, there's a big Victorian stripe through me. You know, that's what I like about hospitality, because it's making people around me feel better. And I would never allow my own personal integrity.
No, sure. I'm not suggesting you would. I'm just saying
No.
I'm sure it happens. You know?
And people say that because it is that sense of conspiracy. And on one hand, yes, it's logical. And a lot of conspiracy theory is based on the fact that it's sort of logical. But, I mean, I've never received any pressure from any brands that I've worked for. And I wouldn't see it being beneficial necessarily to be like, I am going to vote for 5 bars where I know they're making great Tanqueray drinks. Because the link between them being that number one and the fact that Tanqueray is the house brand, it would mean nothing to me if I was running another bar. I'm not going to be as good as the Dead Rabbit if I'm pouring Tanqueray because the Dead Rabbit pour Tanqueray. And it becomes a sense of the 50 best and awards and things like that. I mean, I find, rather like bartender competitions, I didn't get into bartender to win competitions, especially not subjective ones about the fanciness of the cocktail and things like that. And 50 best, I mean, we don't do, is 50 best basically Eurovision? I mean, about music? I mean, you don't have that, and there's not a 50 best artists in the world, or 50 best this, and you could set up standards in terms of, okay, the most profitable, or, the highest volume and things like that. That's fine, that's measurable and definable. But I think, again, it's another way for drinks companies to sponsor stuff, to get involved with stuff. And yeah, maybe there are people around who is like, yeah, you cannot vote for someone who doesn't pour our brands. You can't vote for someone who does. But to me, the link is so tenuous for most people. I have no idea what the house gin at Sips is. I have no idea about, it doesn't interest me, doesn't bother me, wouldn't maybe go there or not go there. Or they pull Bombay Sapphire, I hate that. No, I mean, but it's a reason for people to say it's flawed system. I mean, I just think inherently it's flawed. I stopped voting because I realized that when I walked into a bar, this was in the days that people still recognized me. When I walked into a bar, I didn't get the same experience as a civilian.
That's another problem with it. Yeah.
And so why should I say, the Artesian, good example, you walk in 9 o'clock on a Saturday night because somebody's like, oh, let's go to the Artesian. You walk in and they see you and they're like, oh, Angus, how many, 4 people? Yeah, not a problem at all. 5 minutes later, there's a table. There's a bottle of champagne next to it with a glass of champagne when you start. And I'm like, okay, I can't vote for this as the best bar in the world because I've just been not bribed by any means, but I've been looked after. And I used to go to a lab bar in London before the awards. I stopped going because I would walk in and people would be like, Angus, what do you want? I'm like, there's 6 people in front of me and they're all turning around like, who the fuck is this guy? They're like, I'd just get a beer. And a bottle of beer, how much? No charge, right? It's a tenner type thing. So it cost me a tenner to get a beer that I can't get a receipt for either. So I'm going to stop going to lab because it's...
Yeah, the awards thing, I was having this conversation with someone the other day. I'm kind of split on it. On the one hand, it's pretty easy to be cynical about the structure of it and, what the motivation is from the sponsors and the publishers' perspective. And then, the social media side of it. I think without social media, they probably wouldn't exist because it's the fact that the bars then promote their positions and then they're promoting the sponsors and so on. So all that cynicism and everything. But then on the other hand, I would imagine it's done a great deal of good in the industry just in elevating the potential aspiration of a venue, maybe not in the perfect way. It might not be that a bar that wants to be on this list is executing hospitality in the perfect way. They might be executing what it takes to get on this list perfectly. But I think especially for countries and cities that are developing in cocktail culture and hospitality, it can help inspire when this bar gets on this list, or it could be like world class. When this bartender gets through to this national final, it does start to elevate everything a little bit more. And you might get bad bars as a result of it, but bars that talk a lot and shout a lot. But you also might get people who become highly adept at hospitality as a result as well.
But we're rewarding bars that are the equivalent of 3-star Michelin now. I mean, I couldn't tell you who's in the top 10, but how many of them don't have a Eau de Vap, Sous-Vide, Centrifuge, Pacojet, etc. I mean, off-the-shelf drinks, I could send you a recipe, you could make it, are becoming less and less popular. And I love 3-star Michelin restaurants. I've had incredible times. I've had really uncomfortable times where I feel I'm bowing, groveling at the feet of the chef, and I should be glad to be here. I think there is a split going on with bars as being places that you go, not because of the drinks, you'd go there because of the social aspect of it. Like the drinks were a thing that you went there, but you went there with friends to catch up, to have drinks, get drunk, listen to music, get laid. I mean, that's what bars are about. Whereas, you go to restaurants because you want to catch up with friends, eat good food, and that's all fine. But as soon as you start to rarefy it, I mean, I wouldn't go to a 3-star Michelin restaurant. If I had the money, I wouldn't go to a 3-star Michelin restaurant every night, even if I could afford it. Because I was like, no, I want to go to an Odeon, I want to go to a Cafe Pacifico, I want to go to, just let loose. And I think an awful lot of those top 50 bars are like that. They don't need the business. They're all busy, and all it's doing is making them busier and busier. There are now, whatever the cocktail equivalent of foodies are, people who are going to all 50 of the 50 best, etc. Not always successfully. I mean, having run the Dark Horse for 2 years, customer reviews, Google in particular, but TripAdvisor as well, become crucially important. Because the amount of people are like, I got to town, I Googled bars, best bars in Bath, and came down here, etc. It's word of mouth, but it's written.
Yeah.
And we would respond to absolutely everyone. Like, if you loved your place, thanks, it's so good, really appreciate it. If you hated it, we're really sorry we let you down. We're not your sort of place, etc. Yeah, we don't do draft beer, and we don't have a night, whatever. But you go and look at some of the reviews for the top bars. I'm going to say the number one bar in the world has a 4.1 review for score on Google.
Does it?
Yeah. And they don't respond to any. Occasionally they do, and they're so, I wouldn't say abusive, but it's just like, yeah, this does not read well. And one of the reasons I like reviews is because these are paying customers. I mean, let's not forget, again, you go back in history, bars didn't get reviewed. Like, restaurants got reviewed in a newspaper once a week. Nowadays, so many reviews all the time.
Well, the review was word of mouth, right? It was sort of given casually to the next person you see, or your family member or friend, right? It wasn't forever enshrined on the internet.
So, social media is so important now from reviews because, as I say, when somebody's like, this portion size is too small, one person says it, they're cheap. 50 people say it, you need to look at it. If somebody says, the aviary, like in the first 3 years of 50 best, I put the aviary in my list, and it didn't make the list for the first 3 years. And I was like, what the hell? It's an incredible place. And some people argued, well, it's a restaurant that serves cocktails. It's not really a bar. You can't sit at the bar. Is it really a bar, etc.? But I used to look at the reviews, and one of the reviews constantly, one of the themes of the reviews was, it's great, but getting in is a nightmare. The door guy, the door policy is a nightmare. And it's like, right, if enough people say that, you need to say, we thought it was cool, but maybe it's not. Maybe we need to go back and look at it. But it seems that some of the top bars in the world don't ever look at those reviews because they're like, if you don't like us, you're wrong. And it's like, yeah, that's dangerous, that is.
You mentioned the Dark Horse. That was a kind of return to front of house for you. So how did that feel? You were there for a couple of years?
A couple of years. I've known Louis Smith for some time, etc. I mean, obviously through Milk and Honey, and then Hendrix. He was a Hendrix ambassador. I was a Tanqueray ambassador, sort of thing. So that was all fine, good and friendly. And he called me up one time, maybe a year before COVID, and said, I got this bar. I knew he had a bar in Bath, and I knew he'd opened another one in Bristol. And he was like, I realized that I'm good at setting up bars. I'm not necessarily good at running bars, which, having done a lot of consultancy, owners are often really good at that. And it gets to a stage where you need to step back and step away.
I can feel a little bit of that burn.
Yeah. So he said, look, I need some help. You're obviously experienced. Is something you could do? And I talked to him and said, no, the problems you're having are, shall we say, far more, not about the operation, it's far more about the back of house, the systems, not management systems, like the financial systems. Like, you're just not good at paying your bills on time, you're not good at managing budgets. So I connected him with my younger brother, because that's very much his skill set. He'd worked at Ricker restaurants and then Village East and places like that. He knew his stuff for that. So I put Alex in place there, put them in touch, he worked there. Then after COVID, they had a terrible time during COVID, but then after COVID, they're like, look, we want to expand, but we need to build a pipeline. And we need to especially develop managers, and you've been doing all of this work with. So would you like to come and be, director of people and drinks? Because they also wanted some credibility of the drink side of things as well. And so I went in there and I was like, right, I can't bartend. I'm too slow. I didn't learn how to shake with 2 shakers, etc. Because I was tin and glass, and you can't do that with 2 hands or 1 hand. So I looked about it. I hate carrying trays. I'm just no good at carrying trays. I manage, but it's a small business. I need to do something. So I decided, it was best to be the host stroke maitre d'. And that was, I have to say, I've always looked down on hosts as being basically like cute boys and cute girls who walk you to the table. through the work I was doing for management coaching, I'm like, no, a good host will ask you questions and then pass that information on. And also, I like the idea of a maitre d'. I used to wear a suit and tie, even though it's a very casual place, because I like that sense of you walk down the stairs and you get door opened by this sort of suited and booted, thank you very much, welcome to the Dark Horse, etc. And it just set a tone.
Yeah.
And it reminded me how much I really liked hospitality, like putting smiles on people's faces, but also working with a team, a young team, helping them. People would walk down the stairs. Louis had a thing that the door handle is made of lava. You always open it for guests, leaving or entering every single time you open the door for them. And I like that because it's manners, and manners are worth, cost nothing and are worth millions. So they'd walk down the stairs and they'd say, good evening, welcome to Dark Horse, how are you doing today? They'd be like, I'm fine, how are you? So I'm doing ridiculously well. And people would go, wow, ridiculously well. I was like, if I was doing any better, it would be a crime. They're smiling, they're laughing, I lead them to the table, I tell them some amusing story about the table they're sitting at. But I've set the team up for success because these people are laughing and smiling now. Like, that's one of the keys. If you get people smiling when they're first sitting down, as opposed to being like, yeah, do you have a reservation? That sort of thing. So it really taught me about that. Working with young bartenders, in a market of 100,000 people. I mean, I moved there from Singapore. Before that, I've been in Hong Kong. Before that, I've been in New York. I mean, I've lived on city blocks that have more than 100,000 people, but now this is my market. It was interesting. What did I learn? I learned a lot about working with younger staff these days. I mean, I hired, while I was there, probably 25 staff. And I would have thought 75% of those staff were on some sort of medication. Anxiety, panic attacks, depression, etc. The modern world is so intrusive now via things like social media. It's relentless. I mean, again, I remember when TV used to stop at midnight and there were only 3 channels anyway. Now rolling news cycles and all of this stuff, doom scrolling, FOMO, anxiety, all of this stuff is rampant.
Playing havoc.
And it's terrible within hospitality because hospitality is stressful. You do have to deal with ourselves sometimes. You do have to not take it personally. There's a lot of hurry up and wait. There's a lot of doing boring shit. The grass is always greener on the other side because someone else's social media makes it look as though their drinks are so much better. But as I say, it's not a tsunami of mental health issues or mental fitness, as I like to call it, because it's not mental health, it's fitness. You can work on it. You need to get good at dealing with stress because stress is going to happen in your life. You can't just take pills and medication to get away from it. You can't run away from it because it's going to happen. But it reminded me how much I like hospitality. It reminded me that I was good at operations. And also, one of my favorite books, and back in the old days, David Embury's The Fine Art of Mixing Drinks. He was a solicitor, whatever the American word is, etc.
Attorney.
Yeah, he was an attorney. But he wanted to write the book because he wanted to shake out the mental filing cabinets of his head because he loved drinks. And one of the things I realized is I have so many ideas for cool little drinks and serves and little things I've seen, etc. And I just needed a place to play with them. So, I did, as a bartender, was an ambassador and things like that. You're traveling around the world, you go into lots of bars. And once you realize you can trust a bartender, I used to have 2 games or tricks I would play with them. Not tricks, but games. First one, when I was a gin guy, is I would say, so I once had a drink called a Copper Illusion. All I can remember about it is it has gin, Campari, and Cointreau. I can't remember what glass it was in, I can't remember the proportions or the garnish or anything. So can I have a Copper Illusion? And then see what the bartender did with it. Some of the time they're making it like a Negroni, equal parts on the rocks, they're rinsing the glass with Campari, whole bunch of stuff. Had some incredible drinks, and it just became a thing that I did. I think hashtag Copper Illusion on Instagram should bring up some of those. But the other one was a 3-rum Daiquiri that I said, look, I love a Daiquiri. You can make a Daiquiri, great. Make me one, but instead of using 1 rum, use 3 different rums. Your choice. There's no wrong answer to it, etc. So also through spirits, the infinity bottle, which, where you have a bottle of whiskey that you like, you drink half of it, you fill it up with half a bottle of another whiskey you like, then you drink some of it, then you add some more whiskey that you like, and it becomes a living cask or a living bottle. So I said, right, I need a sort of signature drink. I'm terrible at inventing new drinks, but what we did was we created the Infinite Daiquiri. So the Infinite Daiquiri, we created a 5-litre blend of rums on the back bar, using about 40 different rums. Some of them just like 25 ml bought from Whiskey Exchange, some of them a bottle of the house rum. The idea was we then listed the 30 rums that we sold. They were all £20, whether it was Havana 3 or Rare Nephew, 15-year-old, whatever it may be. You bought a 50 ml of the rum of your choice for £20. We added it to the mix. We stirred it round. We pulled out 50 ml of the bottom. We'd made a daiquiri with it. We gave you a certificate with the number of that daiquiri. And there was a counter up on the wall that went from 401 to 402. That it's one of the proudest things I've ever done, because the point is that drink is 100% unique. That drink will never, ever, ever be possible to be made again. It doesn't matter even if 3 people order the same rum. Every time you stir it, mix it, and do it like that, as long, it's going to be different.
Yeah.
So it was just like, right, okay, really cool. The counter on the wall, it was people were like, what's that number?
Counters are good, eh? So people, and like, you know, you go to Pacifico, there was the, you had to buy a shot of the very expensive
Asian under Millennium.
and you get your name on the thing. I get my name on the wall of one of my favourite bars. Like, I'm going to pay the money, and there was quite a lot of money, I think, like £150.
150 quid type thing. My name's on there with Henry Besant and Pedro and Tom Estes and a whole bunch of people. And there's a great picture. It's like, right, there's 8 people there, and there's like £1,000 worth of tequila in that picture.
My name went up there. Tom, my business partner, Tom and I think something good had happened that day. We'd made some money, and we went to Pacifico, and we were like, yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I mean, I obviously, the counter thing was a key, and I said, I want to do this drink, and I want to have a counter on the wall. You know, I want a button that you press, and the number goes up, similar to Dry Martini in Barcelona.
Yes.
And I always wanted, I was still working with Tanqueray when they got, you know, it was like 998,000 or something. And I was just like, can I convince Tanqueray to allow me to buy 2,000 martinis? But when it got to, I think, 1,000 before, they covered the counter up so that you couldn't get people saying, I'll buy 7. They knew what the number was, and when it got to the 1 millionth martini,
That's clever.
bells and whistles went off. But
Yes.
I mean, to my mind, the Infinite Daiquiri was, I wouldn't say the perfect drink, but it was a geeky drink for rum fans and stuff like that. It was also really good for business because, as I say, having the counter on the wall made, what's that? The certificate that you went away with became a marketing thing, that you had it in your pocket, people Instagram it, and, you know, and it was like, yeah, from a hospitality industry point of view, that was a wonderful drink. And then people were like, well, you should do an Infinite Tommy's, and you could do an Infinite Old Fashioned. And I was like, well, you could. And we've actually given like starter bottles, 250 ml of that, to Jungle Bird over in KL, for example, and they've done it in a different way. Every time you order a drink, they'll take a picture of you as well and put a Polaroid of you up on the wall.
That's like the old cock and bull ginger beer and Smirnoff.
Yeah, the success of that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I just realized there's a whole bunch of stuff like that in my head. You know, I love droodles. A droodle is an art form created by Roger Price, who did Mad magazine. And it is, you would recognize one. I mean, if you know the Frank Zappa album, A Ship Arriving Too Late to Save a Drowning Witch, the idea is it takes no artistic talent to do. It is basically a bunch of lines on what turned out to be a cocktail napkin. And they were basically set up in the sort of 1950s. You're sitting next to a girl at a bar. How do you break the ice? You draw a couple of lines on it and flick it over to her and say, hey, what's that? And she's like, I don't know. It's like, it's the other side of a bear climbing up a tree. And people laugh and smile, and it breaks the ice, and away you go. But I just love the idea, rather like tiki being the only cultural medium art form that started off in bars. You know, you've got tiki hairdressers and tiki bowling alleys and tiki shopping centres, but start off in bars. This was an art form that started off in bars. I want to run a bar where I can have, like, droodles. You know, either getting people to write them or having them sewn onto napkins that you could wash from a sustainability point of view, etc. But I want a place that I can do that. And 35 years of ideas, I'm like, I wanted to open my own bar, and it didn't happen because of COVID and construction issues and all the stuff that happens, etc. But there's still all those ideas in my head, and going back into operations allowed me to do it. Not necessarily ever taking credit. You know, it wasn't about me. Because the staff, you know, every time you sell a £20 cocktail, they make £2 in tips. Very much, which is better than selling a £15 cocktail. So they liked it.
We did a similar one to your Infinite Daiquiri at Black Rock when we first opened. You know, we had the table with the channels in it.
Yeah.
And so that was a sort of Infinite Old Fashioned for a while, about 6 months or a year. And we didn't do certificates or counters, but all we did was have a policy of putting the last 50 ml of every bottle we finished into it. Of course, we had to keep topping it up because that wasn't enough to keep up with demand. But it was fun because, again, you're never going to get the same drink twice.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I remember reading it, and you know, your table was a thing of beauty, etc. And it was like, yeah, it's a brilliant idea, and it's simple, but it's not groundbreaking, redefining this. It's not the most innovative, creative drink you've ever had. It's like, it's a daiquiri, and you can't go wrong with it. I mean, it's like, it doesn't matter what 3 rums you choose. It's still going to be a daiquiri.
As long as you get the lemon and sugar balance right.
Yeah, of course.
Recently, in response to a post on X, someone was asking for advice on how to be a great bartender, and you posted a reply. This is the reply. Invest in good shoes, read an actual physical newspaper from cover to cover every day, learn how the business of your job works, be excellent at pouring accurately, show genuine interest in your guests, break down the bar like your mother is working the day shift, never be late, don't drink during shift, hone your patience, and learn as much as you can about every product you serve. It's a great list. Anything to add or further comments to make?
Not so much. I mean, I think it was on Threads, not X.
Sorry,
I'm
Threads.
off X now. That's fine, as most sensible people should be.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the things on Threads like X are just engagement bait. People like, and this was I thought, no, I'll write a serious answer to this. And it's a mix of the craft of the bartender and also the industry portion of it as well. But I was pretty proud about that, because I was like, you only have a short amount of space to write it. It's not an article about how to do these things. Things like, the read a newspaper every day is basically be good at conversation. Like, I don't know an awful lot about football, for example, but a lot of people who sit at my bar like football. So I need to know enough about football to start the conversation. Somebody once said, an American said, a bartender's like a sort of conversational quarterback. You're just there passing the ball around and letting people run with it and score touchdowns, etc. The art of conversation is getting the other person to talk about what they like. Read a newspaper, an actual newspaper every day, because as I say, there's a lot in a newspaper, and there'll be a couple of stories that you're like, I read this story today in a newspaper, and it's a start of a conversation. I think the art of conversation has been killed by bartenders who stand behind how good their El Presidente is, not realizing that nobody gives a shit about how good your Presidente is. Do you make me feel welcome, comfortable, important, and understood? That's what hospitality is. Wear comfortable shoes. Look after your body. Drink water. You come into work and you're drinking espressos, you're drinking Red Bulls, you're drinking Gatorade or Lucasade. I'm like, no, drink water. Like, water's so much better for you. You won't be hyped up and amped up later on. Be good at winding down. Education director for BCB. We've done sessions on mental fitness. We've done sessions on physical nutrition. This session that we're doing this year is winding down. Because, you finish work at 1 o'clock, you clean down the bar, you might have a beer, you go home, it's now 2:30. You sit there, you're all a bit amped up and excited, etc., and you doom scroll, and suddenly it's 4:30. And you're like, right, that's why you can't sleep and why you're tired the next day.
It must be a nightmare. I haven't been bartending really since social media was a doom scrolling thing. Social media was there when I was last properly behind the stick, but it wasn't in such an invasive manner as it is now.
No. And it is very, very clever people are developing it so that it makes you stay on, it makes you scroll.
Hyper palatable media, yeah.
It's dopamine hits, all this sort of stuff. But I remember you go back, I didn't bartend when television closed at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock or whatever, but I remember going back and stumbling on several incredible films, because it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm just going to turn on ITV and sit there, and it's like, oh my God, Channel 4 was always great, like The Legend of 1900. Discovered that one night and just sit there and like, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have seen it otherwise. But yeah, looking after yourself. But the idea is, when you start off, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, you become sexual, as a man in particular, or as a woman, I guess, you become sexually irresistible behind the bar. And most men try to capitalize on it, and most women get pissed off by it, etc. But that idea that bartending really is a profession. It's not a lifestyle. It starts off as being a lifestyle. We all go through the phase where you learn that you can set alcohol on fire, and suddenly you're setting everything on fire, and shot glasses stuck to your hands and stuff like that. But you get past that. But it is a profession. It is something that is easy to do badly, difficult to do well. And a profession, you think of professions, lawyers, doctors, architects. What do they have in common other than respect and things like that? They require extensive training, education, and testing to be able to do. And I think we don't have the testing component in bartending. But good bartenders now, you need to be taught about what makes difference for these things. And you need to be trained how to do it properly. But increasingly, I drink so little nowadays. I only drink really good stuff because it's expensive, and so that it becomes its own self-limiting factor. But I won't do a shot after midnight type thing. Nothing good comes from having shots after midnight. Shots in general, I'm like, no, I'm good. And as you get older, you get better at saying no, which is a very important skill to get good at.
Yeah, or I wonder if it's just what happens as you get older means that you're incentivized less to do it. You know?
And your hangovers are ridiculously toxic.
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to feel it now. But I'll be lying if I said I don't like the occasional shot, you know? You know, everything in the right setting. It's not standard practice these days.
But how many times, or I remember learning about those weird spirits, things like the largest consumer of Benedictine per population is a small village outside Barnsley, because they were stationed in Frey Camp during the First and Second World Wars. The largest consumer of Campari per head of population is St. Lucia, because it puts lead in your pencil.
Yeah, Grenada, actually, I think it is.
Great. I mean, it's somewhere you're like, what the hell?
They're also I think they're the second or third highest alcohol consumption per capita in the world, Grenada, after Belarus and Georgia.
Something like that. I mean, Czech Republic, they always do a lot of beer. But I had just been over to San Francisco. My dad was writing a book. We drove across America so we could visit some things. When I was in San Francisco, I bumped into Dre Masso, and he took me first to meet Julio Bermejo. It was like, okay. But then we went to a bar called the R Bar, which had a wonderful staff uniform. It was know what you want, know what your friend wants, have your money ready, say please and thank you. That's what it said on the back of the T-shirts. It was the staff uniform. But I took a picture, and I've still got the picture, and it's Dre sitting there, and behind him are Fernet Branca bottles on the back bar. Or not on the back bar, like on a shelf over the door. And this was the time that Fernet became the handshake of choice. And there was the 2020 Club, which was 20 bars in San Francisco that sold 20 cases of Fernet a month. Crazy. And there was a list to get into it type thing. So I came back to both running Trailer Happiness at the time. And I came back and I was just like, I want to be like the largest consumer of something. And we looked on the back bar and I was just like, green Chartreuse. So that became, if we liked you at Trailer Happiness, offered you a shot, green Chartreuse. We had one bottle in the freezer for novices and one bottle on the back bar, etc. And I loved it, and it became, that was my shot of choice. I went around the world. And I remember coming back to the trader at one stage, and I got this call, Frenchman. I can't do a French accent, but it's a guy saying, my name is Philip Rocher, we need to meet. And I'm like, I'm sorry, Philip, who are you? He goes, I'm the global brand manager for Green Chartreuse. And I'm looking at 4 emails from 4 different people in 4 different continents saying that you're a big Green Chartreuse fan, we should meet. It's like, hell yes. But increasingly now, as we get older, you say, I'll do a shot, but it has to be something not necessarily high-proof, pokey like that, but, you know, you got Malort on the back bar, I'll do a shot of it. You do Riga Black Balsam on the back bar, I'll do a shot. But if you were to say, hey, let's do shots of Jameson, I'm like, nah, I don't need a shot of Jameson. Yeah. Something interesting, you know, the American bartenders, a lot of the time, it's like, buy you shots, so you buy the bartender shots. I remember doing a round of shots of Johnnie Walker Blue, merely because it was on the very top shelf and Deb Johnson had to get up and sort of crawl up to get it. But I'm like, we're going to do a shot. Let's do something ridiculously inappropriate, like shots of Johnnie Walker Blue.
See, I like to do a shot of something that is ridiculously appropriate. So I like to culturally invest myself. And that often means, you know, a shot of Jameson's if I'm in the right bar in America and I'm drinking the right beer and I'm with the right people. That's very appropriate. And you know, it's the same reason that you might, you know, you drink tequila when you go to Mexico because it's appropriate to drink it.
Yeah, I'd say I think partially it is because my hangovers are...
Yeah, no, I can totally understand
exponent.
that, yeah.
I mean, I wake up now and I'm like, I must have got run over when I was going home last night. And I still remember when Hill's Absinthe came back out in the UK.
Yeah.
I was having dinner in Pharmacy in Notting Hill with Beth and Ryder and a couple of her friends, and they were like, oh my God, Absinthe, let's do Absinthe. And it came and they tried it. They were like, horrible. So I mind-swept the table of Absinthe. Then we
shot it all back.
Yeah. Because they were like, oh, I don't like it. And I was like, well, I can't leave it here. Bang, bang.
Can't leave it here.
Then we went to Shea.
Evidence.
So I went to Shea when Shea was still a thing, and that was fine. I had a wonderful time there. And then went home. I don't remember going home. Woke up the next day, stinking hangover. Absolutely. Like the hangover they describe in Bonfire of the Vanities, where your brain has become the yolk of an egg rolling round within your skull. Next day, still feel terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, and that that was on Saturday. Sunday I'm hungover. Monday I'm hungover. Tuesday I'm like, this absinthe is, maybe it's like separated my brain stem or something. But I went to see the guys at Shea. I said, do I have anything to apologize for? And they're like, no, not at all. And I then pointed out that I'd been doing a few other things that night. And they're like, well, actually, yeah, now you do say it. You were, yeah, okay. I was like, right, so I do have something to apologize about.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, you do.
It's lack of sleep a lot of the time as well, though, or poor quality sleep. Like, even if you lie down after drinking that much, you're effectively unconscious, not sleeping. So that exacerbates the problem. You've obviously got the dehydration and so on, lack of salts. But I think, like, unless you get quality sleep, which you're not going to, you're going to suffer badly.
Of course. But somebody also said, you're only going to have a certain amount of drinks in your life. Let's say that's how much the human body can process. Let's say it's 100,000. So after a bit, you're like, well, fuck, I'm on 70,000 now because I've drunk an awful lot of bad drinks and lots of bottles of Sol and lots of shots of Rebel Yell and lots of inappropriate shots of etc. So, but I've still got over half my life left, and yet I'm 3/4 of the way through the amount of drink. So I'm just going to drink less but drink better. It becomes a necessity thing. And as I say, it's rather like, when I go into a bar now, I drink simple drinks and classic cocktails. I don't, on the whole, look at your menu. Because chances are your menu's going to change in a month's time, and nothing on this drinks list was so good it's going to stay.
Yeah, I'm the same. I can't really remember the last time I ordered off menu in a cocktail bar. It's nearly always a classic, unless it's a drink like the Connaught Martini, where it's kind of on menu, but it's a classic, right?
Yeah, the last one I did was, I was in Tokyo Confidential, and I was with my wife, and they had a drink that theoretically tasted like a hot dog. And I have a weird obsession with hot dogs. When I worked in New York, my dinner was basically, I'm going to walk down from my home to my bar, and I'll stop at every hot dog stand I see and eat a hot dog until I'm full.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I love my street meat.
Yeah.
Proper sense.
Well, that's not go on too much about the health of not drinking shots, though, when that's your food.
I was young, I was dumb, I was full of cum, etc. As I say, it was just, that was that rock and roll lifestyle.
Yeah.
But they had this drink that theoretically, because Japan is obsessed with baseball, and Tokyo Confidential was doing a baseball-themed menu. My wife wanted to take a picture of it, etc. But that was the last time I said, okay, yeah, I'll order that drink off the menu. And they spray it into martini glass from a ketchup and mustard thing. As I say, it's that sense of over the top that I'd now get. I don't mind a bit of whimsy, don't get me wrong. Super high concept drinks that are like, this menu will evoke childhood memories and make you, I'm like, really? Like, how are you going to do that?
So what do they put in the hot dog? I got to think American mustard, and then whatever that sort of smoky Frankfurter flavor is.
The
brine from it's probably the juice from the tin.
No, there's no, it did taste like a hot dog. I grant you that. They also had little sprays of something that looked lemon, looked yellow and red, etc. As to what was in it, the point is there's no point knowing now, because you can't make it. You can't say, I had this drink in this bar, could you make it? Because it was sous vide, it was this, it was that. And that's a worry now, that you're not going to get any modern classic cocktails from this era, because nobody can make them.
No, you won't. But then this goes back to what we were talking about creativity and whether it's part of the bartender's skill set. Don't you think that, given that classics can be made at home, that actually it's a necessary feature of a cocktail bar to be making something that is unobtainable to the skill of a mortal?
And there was a session yesterday about restaurant bars. So as I said, most old bartenders, career bartenders, started off in nightclubs, pubs mainly, but restaurants or hotels. And that really restaurant bars have gone from sort of strength to strength because of the increased culinary activities and the cult of the chef and things like that. And they were people learned that they could drink at home during COVID, and now they want to come out and have drinks they can't make at home. But again, it focuses on the product as opposed to the way they make you feel. And I'm a big believer in, services, the efficient production of stuff that you've ordered. Whereas hospitality is how you make people feel about themselves when they're sitting there. And the questions you ask, and say a simple drink, and I have a Negroni, would you like a particular gin in your Negroni? And I'm not making recommendations. We talked about cocktail books. There was, for a long time, these things, cocktail books. I went across, during the Cool Britannia phase, the Met Bar went across and did a bar in Barney's or Saxa Fifth Avenue, something like that. And it was about the Brits are coming. And I met Dale DeGroff, and I interviewed him for Class magazine. I went to the Rainbow Room, and he took me to his office and showed me these old cocktail books. And I'm like, fuck, they're old? Of course they're old cocktail books. Oh, this is incredible. And that's what I picked up. I picked up a Jerry Thomas and a David Embury for $12 each. One of the books I bought when I was then searching through for old cocktail books was O.H. Byron's The Modern Bartender's Guide, which I didn't realize at the time how rare it was.
And that's the first Manhattan recipe, I think, isn't it?
It's the third, I think, you had Jerry Thomas, you had the other one. It was like the third ever written bartending book, etc.
First Martinez as well, is it? Yeah. It's a pretty big one.
But page 2, paragraph 1 of the introduction is still burnt into my brain, which was an inquiry how the beverage is desired, a suggestion how it could be made, a pleasant observation. Anything to attract the guest to your knowledge and civility is as likely to secure them as the finest drink you could set before them. And that's I use that for why I speak so quickly, because I'm used to as a bartender. I got 45 seconds to impress upon you that I'm a professional. I'm not going to try and shut up your girlfriend when you're in the bathroom. How would you like it? Have you ever tried it like that? It's my favorite. That's a fucking awesome coat you're wearing, whatever it may be. That makes people feel better. And new stuff they can't do at home, I mean, in restaurants, yes, some of the time we go there and have this incredible recherche stuff, but some of the time we go there and have a lasagna or we have a hot chicken salad or stuff that, of course, we could cook at home. It's just better if somebody else does it for you and makes you feel important. Important, I think, is the key. I mean, core human emotions are make me feel welcome, make me feel comfortable, make me feel understood.
Sure, but couldn't important one of the contributing factors be we've designed this menu, we have put in the work to create this, we have thought about various ingredients we could have used, we have mixed them into the right ratio, we are not relying on tried and trusted.
For sure, I mean, you didn't do it for me, like you didn't know I was coming in here type of thing.
Not specifically, no.
If you come up with a drink like that. But it does mean that increasingly the top bars in the world do these incredible cocktails, but will I be able to make a sandalwood martini from Teo and Elementary? No, I don't have those tools. So there's going to get to a stage where you have almost an entire generation where there are no drinks coming out now that we can replicate in the future.
No.
I mean, what was the last one? The Gin Basil Smash?
Yeah, probably.
It was probably the last one, like the Penicillin. I mean, we talk about modern classics and how so many cocktails have been invented.
Everyone seems to run out of modern classics after those two as well, right?
Well, I mean...
Depends what you mean by modern, of course, but yeah.
I developed a training program for Tanqueray about modern classic cocktails, and it was say, okay, what makes a modern classic? Firstly, let's look at the time period. What I said was, okay, you ask people, go into the street now, ask them for a cocktail, and they're going to give you pina colada, margarita daiquiri, strawberry daiquiri, etc. Go back 100 years, you ask them for classic cocktails, they're going to say daisies, shrubs, fixes, flips, etc. What drinks, I've always said, if I ever settle down long enough to get married and have children and my children become bartenders, how many drinks from, and I took the period for how long I had been bartending from, how many drinks of that the last 25 years will my children need to know how to make? And the list is relatively small. I mean, it's an espresso martini, it's a bramble, probably a porn style martini, Tommy's margarita, penicillin, green basil smash, Cosmopolitan.
And none of those are in the last 15 years? No.
But, I mean, people would say the Cosmopolitan. I'm like, okay, I put the Cosmo up there as a modern classic.
Yeah, if you're putting 80s and 90s in there, then
Paper Plane, Naked and Famous. I mean, the list has got longer. I mean, I basically just had it. I only had a certain period of time to do it. So I said there are 7 drinks that will become... But, yeah, the list is short. But also, on a similar note, from a food point of view, I mean... You ask about, okay, where is our Caesar salad? Where is our steak Diane?
Sure.
Where is our, and a lot of them are just, they're Asian in terms of like, oh, it's black cod miso, or it's, rock shrimp tempura, things like that. But there's not a lot of people coming up with modern food dishes, classic dishes that you have to do, etc. Also, I mean, the argument, I saw it the other day that, there are restaurants that never change their menu because they're like, well, this is what we do, and we do it really well, and people like us for that. And there are other places that are constantly changing the menu seasonally, and it's just like, one's not better or worse than the other. I grant you that, but a signature drink is not the drink that you're already proud of. The signature drink is the most ordered drink in your bar. That's the one that people come there for, etc. The dark horse, it's the old-fashioned or the pina colada.
Yeah.
We got other drinks we're prouder of, but we sell, 150 pina coladas a week because we make a really good pina colada. Why would we take it off the menu? It makes no sense. It's a business. People come here, they read about it, they want to come and try it, etc. Whereas you've got some bars now, they only serve menu drinks. can I have a daiquiri? Nope, sorry. You know, all we serve is what's on the menu. It's like, no, we're 86 of this drink. It's like, I really wanted to come and have that drink type thing. You've run out of it because you can't make any more of it because it requires the tools and technology and the time and the prep and the things like that. I have no idea how bars nowadays, these uber creative ones, pay for it. I mean, I'm assuming the staff are R&Ding drinks unpaid because it was one of the problems I had with training. I had 12 staff. If I bring my staff in for 2 hours to do training, that's whatever it is, 24, it's 240 quid for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And the bar may benefit from it, but at the same time, it's
still a cost.
20 hours would be, 5% of my weekly labor budget.
Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it?
And when you do that much R&D and that much prep, I get, you do that, have a prep shift, that's fine. But to come in and come up with that many drinks and how many iterations of the drinks, presumably, how many,
And all the alcohol that's getting used to make it as well.
Yeah, but also, I worked with people that had no idea, they used Rotovapes, had no idea really how they worked. I would be like, can you explain it to me? Because I'm looking at this and it says the water's 78 degrees. Like, that's just distillation, isn't it? I thought the whole point about Rotovapes where you use a vacuum and so you can do it at a lower temperature. And we asked for BCB, Rich McDonough, I don't know if you know him, over in Vietnam. He's a huge Rotovap fan. And I was like, if you Google, go onto YouTube and how to use a Rotovap for bartenders, there is very little up there. I was like, I want a how to use a Rotovap in terms of is it temperature, is it pressure? It's like, yeah, it's that. It's also, the angle of the flask. It's also the speed of rotation. I was like, okay, I didn't know any of this. But Stuart Bale, is it, from Crucible? Got him to do a talk about cool tools. I'd done it at BCB 10 years ago, talking about a smoking gun and mixing glasses, and kind of shows how old that was. But, they run the Crucible, which has Rotovaps, freeze dryers, dehydrates, all of that stuff. And he said the Rotovap is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most incredible tools to use in a bar, but it is, without a shadow of a doubt, the most misused tool in a bar because nobody takes the time and effort to understand how they work because we're doing it differently to how a scientist would do it, about extracting versus... and as I say, I think it's great, but it's a £20,000 piece of kit.
Can be, yeah.
Knowing profit margins, basically, we used to say a bar makes a 10% profit margins. If you buy something or spend something, it's got to bring in 10 times that revenue to basically make sense.
Yeah, and it's quite a fragile piece of equipment, I reckon.
And those flasks, when you break one...
expensive when they get...
Yeah, for sure.
We need to finish up soon, but I want to ask you one more question. I've not got through all my questions, so we're going to have to do a round 2 at some point. You were at Barometer Bar Show recently in Kiev.
Yeah.
How was that?
It was, I would say, interesting, but brand ambassadors, as you know, if they ever say interesting means totally shit, but we can't say that. I had presented twice at Barometer before. Have you done Barometer?
It once, yeah.
So as you know, it's a rock and roll bar.
It's massive. It's the biggest stage, I would think, in any...
Yeah, it's the most intimidating one.
Is it 1,000 seats on that stage?
I've heard 800, I've heard 600, but it's a 30-meter long stage, 30-meter long LED, lasers, strobes, smoke, walk-on music. I'm going to say it's one of the most intimidating rooms to present at. And I did it twice before and went back to Kiev another time to do a workshop with a bar group over there. Really liked it, always liked it. That was great. Obviously, then war came along, invasion, etc. And I tried to hire a couple of female bartenders who came out of the market because I was just like, hey, they'd be brilliant. And also, I want to help these people. So that was fine, but then obviously it didn't work out for me. But I read an article about 6 months ago saying there is still a bar scene in Ukraine and in Kiev in particular. And yes, there's a curfew now and things like that, but there's still a bar scene. And so when I saw Barometer post, firstly in Ukrainian, like it's coming back, I reached out and I translated it, said speakers required. I sent an email saying, I see it's only in Ukrainian, are you taking English speakers? And they sent me a message back saying, yeah, we'll do a translated post at some stage. So I saw that and I reached out and said, hell yes, I'll come. And, I studied it, I watch a lot of news, read a lot of news, etc. And Kiev is, protected by Patriot batteries, and it would be bad form for them to be carpet bombed, etc. So it's relatively safe. If it was in Kharkiv or Odessa, I would not necessarily be going. But there's a bar scene there. I probably know some of them. I know the bars that exist, etc. If there's some people there, I want to support them. Mm-hmm. So I was like, yeah, I'll come. And everyone goes in the same way. I mean, nobody flies there, you know, even Joe Biden and people like that. You go in by train. And I saw Stephen Fry had done something about going there.
Where did you fly to then?
I flew London to Warsaw. So I got up at 2:30 in the morning in Oxford, bus down to Heathrow, plane over to Warsaw, train over to Helm, which is, I thought it was just like a Polish city, but it's basically just a train station in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
You then change and get on, let's call it a Soviet-era train, which, you know, compartments with like 4 beds in them. But, you know, I'm sorry, I've never done this before. Nobody here speaks any English at all in any way, shape or form. But you basically get in, immediately set up your bed and go and lie down in it. So I'd been sitting on someone's bed because it's on the sort of bottom bit, and realizing mine was on the top bunk. So, of course, I realized that this is a faux pas. So I get up onto the top bunk with some tiny little ladder, really difficult, roastingly hot.
Oh, no.
I'd been told that there was no food, no water on the train. So at Helm, I'd gone to a local station and bought a couple of sandwiches. I then get on the train, and that's fine. Roastingly hot, sweating like you wouldn't believe type thing.
How long did the journey?
15 and a half hours. You get woken up a couple of times when you go Poland and Ukraine for passport checks and stuff like that. That's fine. So, you know, I knew it was going to be a pain to get there, but 27 hours door to door. I get there, you know, finally managed to get an Uber and I go to the Fairmont Kiev, which is probably where you stayed, etc. And that's fine. I'm, you know, having a cigarette outside and I look and I'm like, oh, what's that in between the 2 roads? 'Cause I don't know if you remember the roads go off like that. I look at it, they're tank traps. You know, great big metal crosses that have obviously been there since the start of the invasion, weren't used because Russia didn't make it to Kiev. Go into the hotel, check in, that's fantastic. Restaurants spas on the 4th floor, restaurants on the 2nd floor, air raid shelter in the basement. I was like, okay, that's fine. Go up all the way throughout the hotel, there's air raid shelter this way, air raid shelter that way. And it's 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, I go to bed. An hour later, and a very polite, you know, over the tannoy, guests are requested to go down to the air raid shelter in the basement. So I put some clothes on and go along and go down to the car park, level -1. And I open the doors open and there's a big sign for Lenovo. I was like, this is weird. Lenovo seemed to be having some sort of sales conference, but instead of doing it up in a ballroom and having to move,
they did it
starting off
down on the air raid shelter.
Over to the side tables and sort of beds and things like that. So I sit there for a bit and I'm like, is somebody going to tell me when it's over? What's going on here? After a bit, there's a message. It's like, okay, the air raid's over. They go upstairs to bed. But then I started to think about it. And firstly, they're all connected via things like Telegram. And as soon as like warplanes are detected or missiles or drones or whatever, they know what's coming. So drones, they don't really give a shit about. There's still an air raid, sorry, but they don't really give a shit about drones. It's missiles and ballistic missiles and bombers that they really mind about. But I started to think, wait there, you know, you're not seeing, this isn't like shock and awe in Baghdad when they were, you know, this isn't Gaza, this isn't, you know, this is not artillery shells coming in. It's not the news I've seen.
Yeah.
So after a bit, I just started ignoring it. I was just like, no, I'm not going to go downstairs. It's not like a fire alarm. Wah, 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 wah. It's just almost a, you know, would you go downstairs?
Ambient.
I was outside waiting for an Uber and a fire alarm and a air raid went off and the cars were still driving around and that was all fine. My Uber still came and picked me up. So I thought, I reconciled it by saying it's rather like if you lived in London and there was an air raid siren every time a drunk driver got into the car. It's like, okay, somebody may well get hurt out of this, but the chance of it being me are limited. So that was all fine. I did a guest bartending shift.
It's amazing how quickly, though, that your sort of risk of
I didn't sleep well the entire time. So I'm lying there and I'm like, if the alarm goes off, I'm going to ignore it. But there is that sense of like the alarm could go off.
Could I start hearing bombs as well?
And I mean, I said, if I saw out of the window, if I saw explosions, I'd be going downstairs.
Yeah.
But I've never won a lottery type thing, and yet I play all the time. It's the same sort of odds. That's fine. You know, you're not seeing 50 people killed. Yes, in Kharkiv and yes, other places. Did a guest bartender shift, which is fun, because of course it's been years since I do basically 1 shift a year type thing normally for guest bartending. And like any guest bartender shift, everybody wants your drinks. Nobody else in the bar can make them. They also want your photograph taken. So all of a sudden it's slow. You look down, you've got 26 drinks on 5 tickets and a bar you've never worked at before. Generally, it was an Old Tom gin, so they were classic Old Tom cocktails, except the bar owner said, we do lots with foams here, so why don't we put a lavender mint foam on top of this drink? Of course, that was the one then everybody wanted.
I feel like we need to revamp guest shifts, and really, you should be the guest host. serve the drinks,
Walk around talking about your drinks.
Give them menu, the bartenders make the drinks.
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt, and the guest shifts are fucked like that. But, so that was all fine. That was on the first night, so I'm all a bit discombobulated. Talking to the bartenders, they've all worked there for like 5 years. They're young guys. And a lot of people in Kiev seem to work in bars for a lot longer. In the UK, 18 months, you move somewhere else, etc. When they get to know a place, like it, that's fine. When the first invasion started, all the bartenders and their families lived in the bar because it was in a basement for 3 weeks. Because they had a kitchen, it was in a basement, they had a toilet, they had a shower, so they all lived in there, etc. And yet, the drinks, exactly how you would expect. I mean, if you've been to Kiev, Paravos, which I went to, exactly the same as it was. Quieter, but exactly the same. Classic cocktails. Went to Pink Floyd, which was another cool bar, but there they were like, all of our 8 bartenders are fighting. They're all at the front, etc. So we lost our entire bar team, and just the cultural shock of that, etc.
Wow.
You see people with prosthetic arms and limbs, and amputation figures for the war are shocking. I mean, something like twice as many amputations so far than there were in the entirety of the Second World War. But their charity is this thing, Superhumans, and they built this center in like 4 months, which is all about prosthetics. Really hardcore prosthetics. We did the show walking around. There's a bartender there, with a prosthetic arm. He takes his hand off and gives it to me, and then sets it up so he can stand there and do that in the picture. And I'm like, do I do that as well? Well, I don't know what the etiquette of posing with people who lost a rimb. But the show felt exactly the same as it was. You would have, you've done it before, you go there, exactly the same setup, slightly quieter. I was the only Westerner there, the only English speaker there. There was maybe a Polish guy who presented in English, so the translator hates me anyway, because all translators hate me of how fast I speak and how much I swear. But, I mean, that was cool, but in the lead up to it, I had maybe half a dozen emails from people saying, hey, so I hear you're going to Barometer. They reached out to me, etc. Like, can we talk about this? I was like, okay, this, it's a risk, but everything's a risk. I don't think it's a huge risk.
What kind of people?
Luca Cinali, Max LaRocca. I saw Mauro earlier, and they said, oh yeah, they reached out to me, etc. I think they reached out to a bunch of people.
I got a message actually.
And people either had scheduling issues or their loved ones said, absolutely not.
That was mine.
And I totally respect that. My wife is living in Kuala Lumpur at the moment. I'm like, she's not going to stop me, so that's fine. My mum was a bit like, you sure? But my dad was a foreign correspondent, and I've hung out with war correspondents who, they're being attacked by Russian helicopter gunships outside Jalalabad. So this is not that. And I had a wonderful time when I was over there. I mean, I wasn't treated like a rock star, but I was walked around the show and introduced to people. And, I said, look, the only thing I can really do for you is theoretically publicity. So if you need me to be photographed doing this, if you need me to be on Barometer TV, I'll do that. And their biggest fear really is that, and it's true, that people, it's just a fatigue. It used to be on the headlines of the BBC News, and now it's not. And people are forgetting them. And the problem is, people will stop donating money, governments will stop sending them arms, and the Russians will win from that point of view. And it's just like, right. So if nothing else, and I reached out to Hannah Lee, actually, because I figure she's probably the most connected person in the industry from a PR point of view, which does a lot with community. I was like, look, I don't want this to be about me, how brave I was going over there, but surely we can find somebody who would write a human interest story about this, who would find it interesting, etc. And just, no, there's no interest in it at all. And how do I continue to say to people, firstly, go next year. Do it next year. It's safe. It's a ball ache to get there, but it's safe.
You didn't sell the transportation, right?
Coming back was equally annoying and things like that.
Just make sure you get bottom bunk.
Bottom bunk, without a shadow of a doubt. Take food and water, that's all good. But, difficult travel is one thing. There's lots of places that are difficult to get to, but this was annoying. But just try to raise, not necessarily awareness, but remind people that these are the same bartenders that we know and love. The men can't travel. The male bartenders can't come out of the country because you're not allowed to leave the country if you're fighting age, effectively. So, the trains a lot of the time are filled with women who go and travel and things like that. And it wasn't life-changing, but it was like, okay, fuck, if I can do something about this, some charity shifts for the superhumans, these centers, etc., just raising awareness and saying, they are still the people that we were before. And bottom line, I like soldiers, I like whether it's about duty and whether it's about, giving yourself up for a greater cause and things like that, there's one thing about going to fight in Afghanistan and Iraq, but if somebody invades your country, I would like to think that you would stand up and say, fuck yeah, give me a gun type thing. Like, Russians have landed in, Ashford in Kent and are moving their way up to London. Fuck it, we can't allow this to happen. And, it's Ukraine versus Russia. Like, I mean, they're not getting their asses kicked, but just 700,000 dead and injured Russians, 50,000 dead and injured. There's 5 times as many people. They're just going to win for sheer numbers. And the fact that Russia's got nothing to do other than build weapons now because they can't export anything. So, but it's been, they've done well from it. I'm like, fair play to you guys. You've given Russia a pretty bloody nose, and it makes sense for the West to continue to support them because at the end of the day, they're testing out their weapons to say, like, don't invest in tanks anymore. Tanks are buggered. Drones, invest in drones, thank you very much. High precision artillery, that's worth it as well. But let's not spend any more money on tanks.
And on that very bartendery note.
Oh, of course. You've got to be good at conversation as a bartender. That's why you read your newspapers.
Yeah, no, totally. We need to draw a close to this, though. Thanks.
Hey,
Angus Winchester, everyone. Where can we find you? Not on X, on Threads.
On Threads, I mean, on social media, I would say on a bar near you. But no, I'm looking for that next big project. I mean, I'm 54 now. I feel 24. Well, my brain feels 24. My body feels 104. But I'm looking for that next great project that I can really, as I say, shake out my mental filing cabinets, whether it's education. I had a wonderful time, not to digress, but I went to Magdalen College School in Oxford, which is a really good academic school, etc. It's really interesting characters. Sam Mendes was there, and Tom Piper was there, and a whole bunch of really interesting people. There was a guy called Guy Browning, he was 5 years above me. I remember him being a tall, white, skinny kid, very white. That's why I mentioned it. Very, very pale, gingery. He was a long-distance runner, but I started reading him in The Guardian. He was doing some really interesting articles and talking about facilitation and creativity, and I reached out to him and said, hey, I'd love to have a cup of coffee with you, etc., and talk not about old time, because you were 5 years ahead of me, etc., and I sat with him, and he sort of said, so what do you want to do with your life? This is when class had just started, that's why I remember the time, and I said, what I really want to do is hotels, really like hotels. He's like, why? I said, because I want it from the moment you walk through the door for it to be like, I've chosen it. It's my music, it's books on the shelves in the rooms, it's vinyl, it's art on the wall that I've chosen, all this sort of stuff. And I waffled on for about 2 minutes, and then he said, yeah, bullshit. I said, what? He said, bullshit. You don't want to open a hotel. What you like is you like finding out stuff and then sharing it with other people. And I was like, fuck yeah. And that taught me, about mentorship, that mentors don't teach you stuff. Mentors ask you questions, and they have a detachment that allows them to, because they're not in any way accountable and they're not you're tied up, they can ask you these questions like, why? Why is that important to you? But he was just clever and did that. And what
like
I realized,
a therapist in a way, you kind of end up, they prompt you to come to the conclusion.
And that's something I'm doing a talk in Athens about the difference in teacher, trainer, coach, and mentor. Because as I say, they are different skill sets and different end results. But what I've realized is that he was true. I like finding stuff out. The fact that you're the curious bartender, I love being curious. Like, why is that? And then we find some more information and then sharing it. So whether it's back in operations where I can share all those specific ideas and stuff that I've seen over my time, etc., and working with teams, or whether it's just in a general educational role. So, I'm just looking for that next big project. Maybe my last project, theoretically, a company would make me retire in 11 years. I always said I never work for a company, so I can continue to do this bullshit talking about cocktails until I'm dead. It works for Dale and worked for Gary and worked for Peter and Salvatore and people like that. But I don't know where I'm going to be next. I don't know where people could find me, and I'm quite happy with that. I'm all right with that because, as I say, I think some of the most interesting people in the world never quite figured out what they were supposed to do.
Indeed, very much. So, yeah.
But I really appreciate the opportunity.
No worries. Well, look, gun for hire. You heard it here first, or maybe you didn't hear it here first, but you've heard it here again.
Things like that. Yeah. I would say probably a bar show somewhere. Probably not a bar anymore.
Yeah.
But I feel like Batman and put a sign up. I'll come running.
Cool. Angus Winchester, everyone.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you.